Hello, and welcome to Brada Tales. Tonight, we're bringing you a selection of eerie stories paired with the soothing sound of rain to help you relax and drift off to sleep. Before diving into the atmosphere of suspense, leave a comment below letting us know where you're watching from and what time it is. If these stories send chills down your spine, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Get comfortable. Let the fear gradually envelop you, and tell us what kind of stories you'd like to hear next time. Settle in, we're about to begin. Path to Shadows. Have you ever felt an inexplicable pull toward the unknown? It was a typical evening in New Mexico, the desert air thick with heat that never seemed to dissipate. I, Daniel Moore, was on my way back from a photography project near the outskirts of the city. As a freelance photographer, I was used to odd landscapes and stranger schedules, but this night felt different. The road stretched endlessly before me, but something shimmered on the horizon, a faint outline of a path leading off the main highway into the desert. At first, I thought it was a mirage, but as I drew closer, it solidified into something unnervingly real, a narrow, cobblestone trail flanked by low, scraggly bushes. I slowed my car, curiosity clawing at my rational mind. Why would a path like this exist here, in the middle of nowhere? Against better judgment, I pulled over, grabbing my camera as if it were a talisman. The silence outside was absolute, save for the distant chirping of crickets. I stepped onto the cobblestone, my footsteps echoing louder than they should have. The air grew cooler, almost unnaturally so, and the landscape around me seemed to blur at the edges. As I walked, the trail led me into a grove of trees, an impossible sight in the desert. Their twisted branches reached overhead, blotting out the moonlight. The further I went, the darker it became, until my flashlight was the only source of illumination. Then came the sounds. At first, it was just a soft rustling, like wind through leaves. But there was no wind. The rustling grew louder, more deliberate, and I froze, straining to hear. Was it an animal? My heart hammered as I scanned the darkness, but the beam of my flashlight revealed nothing. Hello? My voice sounded alien, swallowed by the oppressive quiet. A faint shimmer caught my eye, a pair of glowing orbs hovering at the edge of the trees. Eyes. They blinked, then vanished, leaving me breathless. I tried to rationalize it. Coyotes? Some nocturnal animal? But those eyes were too large, too luminous. I turned back, intent on returning to my car. That's when I realized the path behind me had vanished, replaced by dense forest. My breath quickened. This was impossible. Calm down, Daniel, I muttered to myself. There's an explanation for this. There has to be. But the whispers began, low, unintelligible murmurs, as if the trees themselves were conspiring. They grew louder, more insistent, until I could almost make out the words. The flashlight flickered. Panic surged as shadows danced at the edge of the beam. They moved like figures, silent, stalking. I stumbled back, tripping over a root, and fell hard, my camera smashing against the ground. The whispers stopped. Silence descended once more, oppressive and absolute. And then, one solitary sound, a single footstep, deliberate and close. I turned my head slowly, dread coiling in my stomach. A shadow loomed in the darkness, its form vaguely human but wrong. It was too tall, its limbs too elongated, its movements jerky as if it struggled to mimic life. For a moment, we stared at each other. Then, it took another step toward me. I scrambled backward, the rough cobblestones scraping against my palms. My heart pounded so violently it drowned out all sound except for the echo of that single, deliberate step. The shadow tilted its head, the motion unnervingly slow. Its form shifted slightly, as if it were made of smoke or something less substantial than flesh and bone. My flashlight flickered again, and for a split second, its face, or what should have been its face, came into view. It was blank, featureless, and impossibly dark, like staring into a void. No, no, no. The words spilled from my lips as I clambered to my feet. I turned and ran, the flashlight swinging wildly in my hand, its feeble beam barely cutting through the suffocating darkness. The path twisted and turned unnaturally, leading deeper into the nightmarish forest. The air grew colder with every step, each breath visible as a faint mist. I didn't stop to think, didn't stop to question. My only thought was escape. Then the whispers returned. They started as faint murmurs behind me, but quickly grew louder, surrounding me, as if dozens of voices spoke at once. They weren't words, at least not in any language I recognized, but they carried an unmistakable weight, a sense of urgency that chilled me to the core. I risked a glance over my shoulder, and my blood turned to ice. The shadow was following, moving faster now, its limbs bending and twisting in unnatural angles as it closed the distance. Behind it, more shadows emerged, their forms equally grotesque, their blank faces glowing faintly with the same void-like darkness. My foot caught on something, a root, a stone, I didn't know, and I went sprawling onto the ground. The flashlight slipped from my hand, rolling a few feet away before its beam landed on something. A door. It stood alone, an ancient wooden frame covered in intricate carvings that seemed to writhe and shift when I looked too closely. There was no wall, no structure to support it, just a solitary door in the middle of the path. The whispers were deafening now, and the shadows were closing in. Without thinking, I lunged for the door, grabbing the cold brass handle and wrenching it open. Light spilled out, blinding and unnatural, and for a moment, the whispers stopped. The shadows hesitated, their movements jerky and uncertain, as if the door itself repelled them. I didn't wait to find out why. I stepped through and slammed the door shut behind me. Silence. I leaned against the door, gasping for breath, my body trembling uncontrollably. When I finally opened my eyes, I found myself standing in a clearing. The forest was gone, replaced by a dense fog that obscured everything beyond a few feet. The ground beneath me was soft, like wet sand, and the air carried a metallic tang that made my stomach churn. I turned slowly, trying to make sense of my surroundings, but the fog swallowed everything. And then I saw it, a figure in the distance, shrouded in mist. Unlike the shadows, this one seemed solid, human, but there was something deeply unsettling about the way it stood perfectly still, facing me. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it raised an arm, pointing at something behind me. Dread coiled in my stomach as I turned, expecting the shadows to follow me through the door. But there was nothing, just more fog and the faint outline of another path stretching into the unknown. When I looked back, the figure was gone. My chest tightened. The path behind me had vanished, and the only way forward was the one the figure had pointed to. I didn't want to follow, but what choice did I have? Gripping the broken remains of my camera like a weapon, I took a hesitant step forward. The fog seemed to part slightly, revealing more of the path, but the oppressive silence remained. Each step felt heavier than the last, the air growing thicker, the metallic tang stronger. My thoughts spiraled. Where was I? What were those things? And why did I feel as if I were being led somewhere? The whispers returned, softer this time, almost seductive, beckoning me deeper into the fog. The whispers guided me like invisible hands, their tone shifting from urgent to soothing, almost melodic. They seemed to speak directly to my mind, weaving strange images and fragmented memories into my thoughts. The fog swirled around me, distorting the path ahead, making every step feel like a leap into the void. The metallic tang in the air thickened, leaving a bitter taste on my tongue. The path beneath my feet changed, transitioning from soft sand to something firmer, stone, polished smooth and cold. The fog parted slightly, revealing the outlines of towering structures in the distance. Ruins. Massive pillars rose out of the ground, cracked and covered in twisting vines that glowed faintly. They formed the remnants of an ancient gateway, leading into a vast courtyard surrounded by crumbling walls. At the center stood an altar, its surface etched with symbols that pulsed faintly with an unnatural light. I hesitated at the edge of the courtyard. The air was heavier here, almost oppressive, and the whispers had grown quiet, replaced by an eerie hum that seemed to emanate from the ruins themselves. Something was watching me. I felt it before I saw it, a prickling sensation at the back of my neck, a weight pressing against my chest. I turned slowly, my breath catching as I spotted them. The Watchers. They stood at the edges of the courtyard, their forms barely visible in the fog. Unlike the shadows from before, these figures were tall and regal, their bodies wrapped in flowing, tattered robes that shimmered like liquid night. Their faces were obscured by masks, smooth, featureless ovals that reflected the faint light from the altar. They didn't move, didn't speak, but I could feel their gaze, heavy and penetrating, as if they were peeling back the layers of my mind. "What do you want?" I whispered, my voice trembling. One of the Watchers tilted its head, a slow, deliberate motion that sent a chill down my spine. It raised an arm, pointing toward the altar at the center of the courtyard. The gesture was both commanding and unnervingly gentle, like a teacher urging a student to step forward. "I don't understand," I said, my voice barely audible. The hum grew louder, resonating through my body, compelling me to move. Against my better judgment, I stepped into the courtyard. The Watchers remained still, their blank faces following my every movement. As I approached the altar, the symbols carved into its surface began to glow brighter, their patterns shifting and twisting like living things. A strange warmth emanated from the stone, drawing me closer despite the dread coiling in my stomach. A single object rested on the altar, a black, polished stone about the size of my palm. It pulsed faintly, as if alive, and the hum seemed to originate from within it. "Don't touch it," my rational mind screamed. But the whispers returned, louder and more insistent, urging me to pick it up. My hand trembled as I reached for the stone, the air around it vibrating with an almost electric intensity. The moment my fingers brushed the surface, a surge of energy shot through me, blinding and searing. Images flooded my mind, flashes of the shadowed forest, the solitary door, and the countless figures watching from the fog. A voice, deep and resonant, echoed in my head. "The path has chosen you." I staggered back, clutching the stone, my vision swimming. The Watchers moved for the first time, gliding toward me with unnerving grace. They formed a circle, their masks tilting downward as if bowing in reverence, or perhaps submission. "What is this?" I gasped, my voice shaking. The voice returned, louder and more commanding. "You are the keeper now. The shadows will follow." Before I could comprehend the words, the ground beneath me began to tremble. The symbols on the altar flared with blinding light, and the ruins around me started to dissolve into darkness. The Watchers faded, their forms melting into the fog. I felt myself falling, the world spinning into chaos. The whispers turned into screams, deafening and relentless, as the darkness consumed everything. And then, silence. When I opened my eyes, I was back on the cobblestone path, the desert sky overhead. My car was just a few feet away, its headlights still on, illuminating the emptiness around me. The stone was still in my hand, its surface cold and lifeless. For a moment, I thought it was over, that I had escaped. But then I saw them. Shadows, just beyond the reach of the headlights, their blank faces staring. Waiting. The whispers began again, soft and insistent. They would never stop. I jumped into my car, slamming the door shut with trembling hands. The stone sat on the passenger seat, an unwelcome weight that seemed to pull the air from the cabin. I jammed the key into the ignition, the engine roaring to life. The headlights swept across the desert as I turned the wheel, illuminating nothing but barren sand. The shadows lingered at the edges of the light, their forms rippling like smoke, their faceless stares locked on me. I pressed the accelerator, tires kicking up dust as I sped down the empty road. The path stretched endlessly ahead, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the void. My hands gripped the wood tightly, knuckles white, as I fought to focus. The whispers grew louder, coiling around my thoughts like tendrils of smoke. They were inside my head now, weaving words that didn't make sense but still filled me with dread. I glanced at the stone. It was glowing faintly, its light pulsing in rhythm with the whispers. "Shut up!" I shouted, slamming my fist against the dashboard. For a moment, the whispers faltered, replaced by an eerie silence that was somehow worse. The road ahead flickered, and I realized with a sinking feeling that the shadows were no longer behind me. They were ahead. Figures emerged from the darkness, stepping onto the road in perfect unison. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, like marionettes pulled by invisible strings. I swerved violently, the car skidding off the road and into the sand. The engine sputtered and died. No, no, no! I turned the key frantically, but the car refused to start. The shadows were closing in, their forms growing larger, more defined. They were no longer featureless, their blank faces now bore faint impressions of eyes, mouths, expressions that shifted and twisted in grotesque ways. I grabbed the stone, clutching it tightly as I stumbled out of the car. The whispers surged, louder and more insistent, as if the stone itself was speaking to me. The shadows halted, their blank faces tilting toward the object in my hand. "You want this?" I yelled, holding it aloft. "Take it." I hurled the stone into the darkness, watching as it disappeared into the void. The shadows didn't react. Instead, they continued to advance, their movements deliberate, predatory. Panic clawed at my throat as I backed away, my footsteps uneven on the loose sand. I tripped and fell, the cold night air biting at my skin as I scrambled backward. The shadows loomed over me, their forms blocking out the stars. The whispers became a roar, drowning out everything else. My vision blurred, the world spinning as the shadows closed in. Then, the stone reappeared. It floated in the air between me and the shadows, glowing brighter than ever before. The light was blinding, searing into my retinas, and the shadows recoiled, their forms dissolving into smoke. For a moment, I thought I was saved. But the light grew too intense, too overwhelming. It wasn't just illuminating the darkness, it was burning it away, consuming everything in its path, including me. I screamed as the light enveloped me, its heat unbearable, its energy tearing through my body. The last thing I saw was the stone, its surface etched with shifting symbols, as it shattered into 1,000 pieces. And then, There was nothing. No light. No darkness. No whispers. Just silence. I awoke in a place that wasn't the desert, yet it wasn't anywhere I recognized. The air was thick, heavy with a metallic tang that filled my lungs. The ground beneath me felt solid but unnatural, like polished stone infused with something alive. A faint, pulsating glow lit the space, emanating from the shattered pieces of the stone scattered around me. They floated weightlessly, orbiting my body in slow, deliberate patterns. The symbols etched into their surfaces were no longer static. They shifted constantly, as though alive, speaking in a language I couldn't understand but somehow felt deep within me. I tried to move, but my body was frozen, held in place by an invisible force. Panic rose in my chest, but the whispers returned, soothing and oppressive all at once. They spoke directly to my mind, their tone no longer urgent but resolute. The keeper must remain. Keeper? My voice was a broken whisper. I don't understand. What do you want from me? The space around me shifted, the glowing fragments aligning to form a doorway. Beyond it, I could see the shadowed forest, the solitary cobblestone path winding through the darkness. But it wasn't empty this time. Figures moved along the path, others, like me, drawn into this place by forces they didn't understand. I screamed, begging for freedom, but the whispers drowned out my voice. You chose the path. Now, you guide it. A sharp pain shot through my chest, and I looked down to see the symbols from the stone carving themselves into my skin, glowing faintly. The pain was excruciating, but it wasn't just physical. It was as though something was being written into my very essence, binding me to this place. The doorway dissolved, and the space around me shifted again. I was no longer frozen. Instead, I stood on the cobblestone path, the endless desert stretching out in both directions. The whispers were gone, replaced by a deafening silence that pressed against my ears. I looked down at my hands. They were no longer my own. My skin had taken on the same shimmering, shadow-like texture as the Watcher's. My reflection in the faint glow of the fragments revealed a blank, featureless face. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figures on the path began to approach. They were like I had been, confused, afraid, searching for answers. They didn't see me as I truly was. To them, I was just another shadow, another Watcher. I realized then that I wasn't free. I never would be. The stone hadn't just chosen me. It had consumed me, turned me into part of the path itself, a guardian, a lure, a prisoner. As the first of the new travelers reached me, I raised my arm, pointing toward the ruins as the Watchers had done before. The traveler hesitated, their eyes filled with fear and hope, before stepping forward. The cycle had begun again. Ancient beast. Have you ever felt watched? That creeping sensation at the back of your neck, even when the trees stand silent and the wind barely stirs? I hadn't until last week. My name is Caleb, and I've lived in Pine Hollow all my life. It's a quiet town nestled against an expanse of ancient forest on the eastern edge of Pennsylvania. The woods have always been part of our lives, hunting, hiking, and the occasional ghost story passed around campfires. But now, they feel different. It started with the footprints. The first to notice was Jim, an old-timer who runs the bait shop near the forest entrance. He swore he found tracks bigger than a bear's, with claws longer than his fingers. At first, no one took him seriously. Jim loved a good story, and after a few drinks, his imagination could get the best of him. But then other reports came in. Hunters found half-eaten deer carcasses torn apart like they'd been shredded by something with impossible strength. I didn't believe it until I saw them myself. It was last Friday, just before sundown. I decided to take my dog, Max, on one of our usual trails. The air was crisp, the sky streaked with orange and pink, and the forest was alive with the sound of rustling leaves and chirping crickets. Max tugged on the leash, eager to explore. We were about 2 miles in when Max stopped abruptly. His ears perked up, and a low growl rumbled from his throat. "What is it, boy?" I asked, scanning the trees. At first, I saw nothing. Just the usual shadows stretching long in the fading light. Then I noticed the silence. The crickets had stopped. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. And then I saw them. The footprints were massive, pressed deep into the soft earth of the trail. Each print was nearly twice the size of my hand, with claw marks that raked through the dirt. They weren't like any animal tracks I'd ever seen, elongated, almost human, but not quite. Max whined, pulling against the leash, his tail tucked firmly between his legs. "Easy, buddy," I said, though my voice shook. I crouched down to examine the tracks. They led off the trail, disappearing into the dense undergrowth. Against my better judgment, I followed them, pushing through the bushes and brambles. That's when I smelled it, a sickly, metallic stench that made my stomach churn. It was faint at first, but the deeper I went, the stronger it grew. "Hello?" I called out, though I didn't expect an answer. The forest didn't answer, but something moved in the distance. A shadow shifted between the trees, too large and too fast to be anything I'd ever seen. My heart pounded as I stumbled backward, clutching Max's leash. I didn't wait to see what it was. Max and I ran, the forest seeming to close in around us. By the time we burst onto the main trail, the sun had dipped below the horizon, and darkness enveloped the woods. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those footprints and the shadow in the trees. What kind of creature could leave tracks like that? The next morning, I went to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Carter listened to my story with a raised eyebrow, his coffee cup hovering midair. "You're telling me you saw, what? Bigfoot?" he asked, half smirking. "I don't know what I saw," I admitted. "But something's out there. Something big." Carter sighed. "Caleb, it's probably a bear. They've been wandering closer to town lately." "Bears don't leave tracks like that," I insisted. But Carter waved me off, muttering about hunters and their tall tales. That afternoon, I went back to the trailhead. The footprints were gone, trampled by hikers or washed away by the morning dew. But the feeling remained, that creeping sensation of being watched. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination playing tricks. But deep down, I knew better. Something was out there, watching, waiting. And I had a feeling it wasn't finished. The following days passed in a blur of unease. I tried to distract myself with work at the hardware store, but every rustle of the trees outside made my stomach churn. Max refused to go near the forest. Even his usual enthusiasm for fetch in the yard seemed dulled. The rumors were growing. Jim wasn't the only one talking now. Reports spread of strange sounds at night, deep, guttural growls that seemed to carry on the wind. Farmers on the outskirts of town complained of livestock disappearing without a trace, and some even swore they'd seen glowing eyes in the darkness. The unease turned to fear when another hunter went missing. His name was Eric, a seasoned outdoorsman who'd been tracking game in the woods for decades. He'd gone out 2 days earlier and hadn't come back. Search parties combed the forest, but all they found was his rifle, snapped clean in half, lying in the dirt near a patch of torn ground. The sheriff finally took notice. Carter organized a larger search, enlisting volunteers from town. I wasn't sure why I joined, maybe guilt, maybe curiosity, maybe some desperate need to prove I wasn't imagining things. We gathered at the forest's edge early that morning, the air cold and damp with mist. Carter gave us instructions, splitting us into groups and handing out radios. "Stay together," he warned, his usual smirk replaced by a grim expression. "And if you see anything unusual, don't try to be a hero. Just call it in." I ended up paired with Jim and a younger guy named Ryan, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. We moved slowly through the woods, the mist clinging to the ground like a ghostly blanket. "Ever seen anything like this before?" Ryan asked nervously, clutching his flashlight like a lifeline. Jim snorted. "Seen plenty in my time. Bears, mountain lions, even a black wolf once. But this? Nah, this is something different." We walked in silence for a while, the only sounds the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional crack of a branch. My heart was pounding, every shadow and sound making my skin crawl. Then we found the clearing. It was a small, open space where the trees seemed to lean inward, their twisted branches forming a canopy that blocked out the light. The ground was littered with bones, animal and otherwise. Some were fresh, the flesh still clinging to them, while others were bleached white with age. In the center of the clearing was a massive tree, its gnarled trunk scarred with deep claw marks. The metallic stench I'd smelled before was overwhelming here, making me gag. "What the hell is this?" Ryan whispered, his face pale. Jim crouched down, picking up a skull with shaking hands. "This ain't natural," he muttered. "This is a kill zone." The radio crackled to life, startling us. Carter's voice came through, tense and urgent. "We've found something," he said. "Group 2, report back to the trailhead immediately." "What did they find?" Ryan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Before we could move, a low growl echoed through the clearing. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard, deep, resonant, and filled with a primal menace that made my blood run cold. Jim dropped the skull, his eyes wide. "We need to go. Now." We turned to leave, but the undergrowth exploded in front of us. A massive shadow lunged forward, faster than my mind could process. All I saw were the eyes, glowing amber, filled with an intelligence that was both ancient and utterly alien. Jim screamed as the creature's claws raked across him, sending him crashing into the underbrush. Ryan froze, his flashlight tumbling from his grasp. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Ryan and pulling him with me. We sprinted through the forest, the creature's growls and heavy footsteps close behind. The trees seemed to blur together, the world reduced to a chaotic rush of shadows and sound. Somehow, we made it back to the trailhead, collapsing in a gasping heap as the others surrounded us. "What happened?" Carter demanded, his face pale. "It's real," I managed to choke out. "There's something in there. Something hunting us." Jim didn't come back. That night, I sat in my house, staring out the window at the dark line of trees in the distance. The creature was real, and it was still out there. And now it knew who I was. The next few nights were sleepless. I kept the curtains drawn, but it didn't matter. I could feel its presence, watching from the forest. Max, usually fearless, whimpered at the slightest sound, pacing restlessly around the house. Word spread quickly through town. Most people refused to believe our story, chalking it up to hysteria. Others whispered about curses and old legends, muttering that we disturbed something best left alone. But Carter believed me. "We need to put an end to this," he said when he showed up on my doorstep. His face was lined with exhaustion, but his eyes burned with determination. "It's taken too many. If we don't stop it, more people will die." I didn't want to go back. Every fiber of my being screamed to stay as far away from those woods as possible. But I couldn't shake the guilt. Jim was dead because of me, and I couldn't let anyone else suffer the same fate. So I agreed. The plan was simple, or as simple as something like this could be. Carter rounded up the most experienced hunters in town, men who knew the forest like the back of their hand. We'd go in on to the teeth, track the creature to its lair, and take it down. It sounded easy enough in theory. In practice, it felt like marching to our deaths. We entered the forest at dawn, the air heavy with fog. Carter led the way, his rifle slung over one shoulder, while the rest of us followed in tense silence. I carried a shotgun, the weight of it both reassuring and terrifying. The deeper we went, the quieter the forest became. Birds stopped singing, and even the insects seemed to vanish. It was as if the woods themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. We found more signs of the creature as we moved, massive claw marks gouged into tree trunks, piles of bones picked clean, and patches of ground stained dark with blood. "It's close," Carter said, his voice barely audible. The trail led us to a cave hidden deep in the hills, its entrance obscured by thick undergrowth. A foul stench wafted out, making my stomach churn. "This is it," Carter said, tightening his grip on his rifle. He signaled for the others to spread out, forming a loose circle around the entrance. I stayed close to him, my hands trembling as I gripped the shotgun. "Stay sharp," he whispered. "It knows we're here." We waited, the seconds stretching into an eternity. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the sound of our breathing. Then it came. The creature exploded from the cave with a deafening roar, a blur of dark fur and muscle. It was massive, standing nearly twice the height of a man, its eyes glowing like embers. The hunters opened fire, the gunshots echoing through the forest. The creature moved with inhuman speed, dodging bullets and striking with lethal precision. It slammed into one of the hunters, sending him flying like a ragdoll, before turning its glowing eyes on the rest of us. "Fall back," Carter shouted, but it was too late. The creature lunged at me, its claws slicing through the air. I fired blindly, the recoil nearly knocking me off my feet. The shot grazed its shoulder, making it roar in pain, but it didn't stop. Carter stepped between us, firing his rifle point blank. The creature howled, its massive paws swiping him aside like he weighed nothing. "Run," he gasped, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. I hesitated, torn between staying to fight and saving myself. But the creature was already turning back toward me, its eyes burning with a terrifying intelligence. I ran. The forest blurred around me as I sprinted, the creature's roars echoing behind me. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed to get away. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead, but I didn't dare stop. Somehow, I made it back to the edge of the forest, collapsing onto the ground in a heap. The creature didn't follow, it didn't need to. It had made its point. Carter and the others never came out. That night, I sat in my living room, clutching the shotgun like a lifeline. The town was in shock, the loss of so many men shaking even the most skeptical. But I knew it wasn't over. The creature was still out there, watching, waiting. And it wouldn't stop until it had finished what it started. I didn't leave the house after that night. The thought of stepping outside, even to check the yard, made my skin crawl. Max stayed close to me, his usual playful energy replaced by a nervous vigilance. He'd growl at the windows, his fur bristling, as if sensing something I couldn't see. The town was in chaos. The sheriff's disappearance had shaken everyone, and the rumors were out of control. Some people fled, abandoning their homes with little more than what they could carry. Others barricaded their doors and windows, stockpiling food and weapons. The forest became a no-man's land. No one dared go near it, not even during the day. The creature's territory had expanded, its presence bleeding into the outskirts of town. Livestock disappeared nightly, and some said they heard its growls echoing through the streets after dark. And then it came for me. It started with the noises, soft at first, almost imperceptible. Scratches on the walls, the faint creak of floorboards in the middle of the night. I tried to convince myself it was the house settling or my imagination running wild. But then the knocking began. It was slow, deliberate, and impossibly loud. It came from the back door, always at the same time, 3 knocks, a pause, then 3 more. I never answered, too paralyzed by fear to even move. One night, I worked up the courage to peek through the curtains. What I saw made my blood run cold. The creature was standing in the yard, its massive frame silhouetted against the moonlight. Its eyes glowed like molten gold, fixed on the house with a terrifying intensity. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there, watching. I grabbed the shotgun and aimed it at the door, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hold the weapon steady. "Leave!" I shouted, my voice cracking. The creature didn't flinch. It just tilted its head, almost curiously, as if mocking me. And then it smiled. It wasn't a natural expression, its massive jaws pulling back to reveal rows of jagged teeth. The sight was so horrifying that I dropped the shotgun, stumbling back and falling to the floor. By the time I scrambled to my feet and looked again, it was gone. The next few days were a blur of panic and paranoia. I barely ate or slept, every creak of the house sending me into a spiral of terror. I kept the shotgun close at all times, even when I showered or went to the bathroom. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time. The creature wasn't just hunting me, it was playing with me, wearing me down until I couldn't fight back. And then the power went out. It happened at dusk, just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The house plunged into darkness, the silence broken only by the distant howl of the wind. I grabbed a flashlight and the shotgun, my heart pounding as I checked the windows and doors. Everything was locked, but it didn't make me feel any safer. That's when I heard it, the scratching. It was louder this time, more deliberate, moving along the walls as if the creature was circling the house. I pointed the flashlight at the windows, but all I saw was my own reflection staring back at me, pale and terrified. "Come on," I muttered to myself, trying to muster some courage. "You've faced it before. You can do this." The scratching stopped. For a moment, the silence was almost worse. I strained my ears, every muscle in my body tensed, waiting for the next sound. And then the knocking began. 3 sharp knocks, echoing through the empty house. This time, they came from the front door. I raised the shotgun and crept toward the door, my breath coming in shallow gasps. "Who's there?" I called, my voice trembling. No answer. I took another step closer, the barrel of the shotgun aimed directly at the door. The knocks came again, harder this time, shaking the door in its frame. Summoning what little courage I had left, I reached for the doorknob, gripping it tightly. "Go away!" I shouted, my voice breaking. And then, in a voice so low and guttural it seemed to come from the depths of the earth, it spoke. "You can't hide." I froze, the words sinking into my mind like icy claws. The creature wasn't just hunting me, it was toying with me, breaking me down piece by piece. I backed away from the door, my hands trembling so violently I almost dropped the flashlight. This wasn't just a predator. It was something far worse. I didn't know how long I stood there, frozen in place. The words echoed in my mind, each syllable dripping with malice. Max barked frantically, his growls turning to high-pitched whines as he clawed at the floor, desperate to escape. The knocking stopped, but the silence it left behind was worse. It pressed against my ears, suffocating and absolute. The flashlight flickered, its beam weakening, as though the house itself had been drained of energy. And then, the door began to splinter. Not from the hinges or the lock, it cracked from the center, wood groaning under the pressure of something impossibly strong. My mind screamed for me to move, to do something, but my body refused to obey. When the door finally gave way, it didn't shatter, it exploded, shards of wood flying into the room like shrapnel. The flashlight slipped from my hands, its beam dancing wildly across the walls before going out entirely. In the suffocating darkness, I heard it step inside. Its breathing was slow and deliberate, each exhale rattling like a death knell. I fumbled for the shotgun, my hand shaking so violently I could barely find the trigger. "You've run long enough," it growled, the words reverberating through the house. I fired blindly into the dark, the deafening blast momentarily illuminating the room. For a split second, I saw it, its massive frame crouched low, muscles coiled like a predator ready to strike. Its eyes glowed brighter than ever, filled with an ancient, unrelenting malice. The shot didn't even faze it. It lunged, and I barely managed to throw myself to the side. The shotgun clattered to the floor as I scrambled backward, my hands searching desperately for anything to defend myself. Max launched himself at the creature, barking and snarling with a ferocity I'd never seen before. But it was futile. With one swipe of its massive claws, Max was thrown across the room, his body hitting the wall with a sickening thud. "No!" I screamed, the sound tearing from my throat like a primal wail. The creature turned its gaze to me, its grotesque smile returning. "You're mine now." I bolted, my instincts taking over as I ran toward the back door. The darkness was disorienting, every corner of the house a potential hiding place for the monster. I stumbled into the kitchen, grabbing a knife from the counter. My breaths came in ragged gasps as I pressed myself against the wall, listening for any sign of movement. The silence stretched on, oppressive and unbearable. For a moment, I dared to hope it had left. And then I heard it, soft, almost mocking, the sound of claws dragging across the floor. "I can smell your fear," it whispered, its voice closer than I'd expected. I tightened my grip on the knife, my palms slick with sweat. If this was the end, I wasn't going down without a fight. The creature's shadow loomed in the doorway, its eyes glowing like twin suns in the dark. It moved slowly, deliberately, savoring the moment. I lunged, the knife aimed for its throat. It was like stabbing stone. The blade barely scratched its hide before it wrenched the knife from my hand and threw me to the ground. Pain exploded through my body as I hit the floor, my vision blurring. The creature loomed over me, its massive hand pinning me down. "This is the end," it said, its voice dripping with satisfaction. But just as it raised its claws for the final strike, a sound shattered the silence, a deep, guttural growl. Max. He was battered and bleeding, but he stood in the doorway, his eyes blazing with defiance. With a final burst of strength, he charged at the creature, his teeth sinking into its arm. The creature howled in pain, its grip on me loosening just enough for me to crawl away. I didn't think. I grabbed the flashlight, smashing it against the gas stove as hard as I could. Sparks flew, igniting the gas that had been leaking from a burner I'd forgotten to turn off earlier. The explosion was instantaneous. The force threw me out the back door, my body hitting the ground hard. For a moment, all I could hear was the roar of flames and the ringing in my ears. When I looked up, the house was engulfed in fire. I didn't see the creature escape. I didn't hear its growl or see its glowing eyes in the flames. But I knew, deep down, that it wasn't over. Max lay beside me, his breathing shallow. I cradled him in my arms, tears streaming down my face as I whispered words of gratitude and apology. The town never recovered. The forest remained dark and impenetrable, a reminder of the terror that had plagued us. And me? I moved far away, to a place where the trees don't whisper and the shadows don't shift. But every now and then, I hear it, a faint growl in the wind, a shadow too large to belong to anything natural. It's still out there, waiting. And it hasn't forgotten me. The Vanished Guest. The Hotel Saltwater wasn't anything special. Situated on the edge of a small California coastal town, it was a crumbling relic of a once thriving tourist destination. Most of its guests were either the elderly, seeking a quiet getaway, or those looking for cheap accommodations during a spontaneous road trip along the Pacific coast. It was the kind of place you could easily forget, tucked away between the jagged cliffs and the endless horizon of the sea. But, in the last few weeks, the air around it had changed. A subtle heaviness, like something pressing down on the buildings, something the sea breeze couldn't blow away. I first noticed it when I checked in. The lobby had an odd stillness to it, despite being bustling with guests. There was a hum in the air, a kind of vibration that buzzed just beneath the surface of everything. The receptionist, an elderly man with deep lines etched into his face, greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He handed me a key, his fingers trembling just slightly as he did. "Room 12, he said, his voice low. "It's just up the stairs. Third door on your left." I nodded, trying to shake the sense that something wasn't quite right. Maybe it was the oppressive weight of the old hotel or the lack of sunlight in the lobby, but I felt a gnawing discomfort that I couldn't quite place. I made my way up to the room, passing through dimly lit hallways lined with faded wallpaper and cracked wooden frames. The hotel smelled of old wood, dampness, and something salty. But it wasn't the usual salty scent of the sea that lingers in the air at the shore. No, this was different. It felt deeper, more pervasive. I reached room 12, my footsteps echoing in the otherwise silent hall. The door creaked as I opened it, revealing a small, warm room. The furniture was old but serviceable, the sheets were white but stained with the passage of time, and the window overlooked the vast, empty beach. It was a typical coastal hotel room, simple, unpretentious, and eerily quiet. I dropped my bag on the bed and moved to the window. The sea stretched out before me, endless and calm, yet something about it unsettled me. The water was darker than it should have been, as though something beneath the surface was watching. It wasn't until later that night, when I went downstairs for a drink at the bar, that I began to notice the other guests. At first, they seemed normal, but the longer I watched them, the more their oddities began to surface. An older woman sat in the corner, her back rigid, her eyes never leaving the door. Two men in their 40s stood at the bar, laughing too loudly, their eyes darting around the room like they were trying to avoid something or someone. And then, there was the couple. They had arrived just before I had, but I hadn't noticed them until later. They were sitting together at a table near the window, speaking in hushed tones, their faces pale. It was their eyes that caught my attention, empty, as though they weren't really there. I tried to shake off the unease settling in my stomach, telling myself it was just the quiet of the hotel playing tricks on me. But then the first one disappeared. It was the older man at the bar, the one who had seemed so jittery when I checked in. I had seen him earlier that evening, and now, after just a few hours, he was gone. It wasn't like he had left the hotel, though. No. I had watched the bar all evening, and he had never stood up, never walked out the door. He had simply vanished. The bartender noticed it too, though he didn't say anything. His expression remained fixed in place as if he had expected this. A quick glance at the clock showed that it was just past midnight. No one else seemed to notice, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. As I made my way back to my room, I passed the same hallway, feeling that same oppressive weight hanging in the air. I reached room 12 and hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should leave, if something in the hotel had changed. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I was trapped here for the night. I couldn't leave now. I was too far from the nearest town, and the fog was thickening outside. I shut the door behind me and sat on the bed, trying to dismiss the creeping fear. It wasn't long before I heard it. A soft rustling, coming from somewhere near the window. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the sound didn't match the usual breeze. This was different. It was almost like something was moving, or trying to hide. I crept toward the window, my heart pounding in my chest, and looked out. The beach was deserted, the waves crashing quietly against the shore. There was nothing unusual about the scene, yet the rustling continued, and it was getting louder, more frantic. I froze, my eyes narrowing. Was I imagining things? The rustling seemed to grow closer, but there was nothing in sight, just the shadows stretching across the sand. Suddenly, I felt it. Someone was behind me. The cold breath on the back of my neck. I whipped around, but no one was there. Just the faintest echo of something unseen. Then the light above my bed flickered. And when it flickered back on, the shadow had moved. It was closer now. The air in the room felt colder, though I couldn't explain why. I backed away from the bed, my eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my hands trembled as I reached for the door, but it wouldn't open. I tried again, but it was as if the door had grown heavier, unwilling to let me escape. My breath quickened. The shadows had shifted. I could see them more clearly now, faint, wriggling figures in the corner of my vision, like twisted silhouettes that stretched and contracted with each flicker of the light. I turned toward the window again, half expecting to see something lurking in the fog. Nothing. Only the vast, empty beach stretching endlessly under the pale moonlight. Yet, as I looked closer, something felt wrong. The waves, they didn't crash the way they should. They rolled in, but their motion seemed sluggish, like the ocean itself was holding its breath. And then I heard it. A faint scraping sound, like nails on glass, from the direction of the window. Slowly, the curtains began to twitch, moving as though someone were standing just beyond them. But I had been watching the beach. There was no one there. The hairs on my neck stood up as I inched closer to the window, my pulse hammering in my ears. I reached for the curtain, my fingers brushing the fabric, and then a thud. I jerked back, my chest tight with panic. The noise had come from the other side of the room, near the door. I spun around, heart racing, but again, there was nothing. My eyes darted from one corner of the room to another, searching for any sign of life or movement. The room felt smaller now, the walls creeping in, the air thickening around me. I had to get out. With a burst of strength, I flung open the door, but the hallway was empty. No one else was there. Not even the strange older man who had been at the bar earlier. I stepped into the corridor, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The eerie stillness wrapped itself around me like a suffocating blanket. I glanced down the hallway. The lights above me flickered again, casting long, stretching shadows along the walls. Something about the atmosphere felt wrong, too wrong to ignore any longer. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was moving in the dark, just beyond my reach. The sound came again, but louder now. A heavy scraping noise, like claws dragging across the floor. I turned to face it, and that's when I saw it. A shape in the far distance. A shadow, no longer just a flicker. It was tall, unnaturally so, and it seemed to glide rather than walk. The figure was shifting, its outline becoming more and more defined with each passing second, but it was impossible to make out its features. I couldn't tear my eyes away. It was as if I had no choice but to watch. The scraping noise grew louder, more frantic, as if something was dragging itself closer, inch by inch. My breath caught in my throat, but I could not move. My legs were frozen in place. The figure reached the end of the hallway, and the lights above flickered one last time before plunging the corridor into darkness. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it all. My heart thudded in my chest, my mind racing to explain the sight I had just witnessed. But then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of something crawling. Something large. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, like it was struggling to stay upright, like it was trying to force its way into the hallway. The scraping noise was replaced by a guttural sound, low and growling, coming from deep within its throat. I took a step back, my pulse thrumming in my ears. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't stand the thought of whatever that thing was getting closer. I turned to run, but the door slammed shut behind me with a force that made the walls shake. I spun around, my heart in my throat, but the hallway was empty again. No shape. No sound. Only the oppressive silence and the lingering taste of fear in the air. But I knew it was still there. Watching. Waiting. I grabbed the nearest stairwell and raced down to the lobby, my legs shaking beneath me. I needed to get out of this hotel. I needed to leave before whatever was in the building caught up with me. But as I reached the ground floor, something froze me in place. The receptionist, the elderly man, was gone. His desk was empty, but a small slip of paper lay on the counter as if left behind in a hurry. I stepped closer, hands trembling, and read the note. It's too late. You've seen them now. My heart sank, and the world around me seemed to tilt. I couldn't stay here. I had to leave. But just as I turned to flee out the front doors, I heard it. The unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate, and growing closer. I spun around, but there was no one there. The door behind me slammed shut. And then the growl started again. I stumbled back, my breath coming in short, frantic gasps. The growl was low, but unmistakable, and it reverberated through the very walls of the hotel. I pressed my hand against the glass door, but it wouldn't budge. It was locked. No, it wasn't locked. It was as if the entire building had sealed itself from the outside. I turned in circles, desperate for an escape, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear the growl that continued to rumble through the hallway behind me. It wasn't just a noise anymore, it was an oppressive presence. It was everywhere, coming from all directions. I looked up, toward the ceiling, but there was nothing. No figures. No shadows. But I could feel the weight of something watching me, something waiting. And then, through the corners of my vision, I saw it again. A shape, tall and impossibly thin, moving in the shadow of the hallway. It seemed to shimmer, like a mirage, something real, but unreal, a flickering blur that was hard to focus on. Its form twisted and reshaped itself in the darkness, as though it couldn't hold a single shape for long. I felt my skin crawl, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I wanted to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. I could feel my body trembling, as if every muscle knew what I was up against but refused to move. My legs refused to carry me anywhere. I was trapped. The growl came again, closer this time, and I finally forced myself to run. My feet hit the cold marble floor with each panicked step, my eyes darting around in search of anything that could help me. But there was nothing. Just the same cold walls, the flickering lights, and the ever-present, gnawing sensation of being pursued. The hallway stretched on endlessly, winding like a maze. I had no idea where I was anymore, no idea where I was running to. It felt as if the hotel itself had turned against me, the walls shifting with every turn, the doors leading to places I didn't recognize. And the growl. It was always there, just behind me, just out of reach, like a constant reminder of the horrors that hunted me. I turned another corner, and this time, I saw them. Shadows. But not just shadows. They were moving, shifting in the darkness, their shapes long and distorted, their eyes glowing faintly as they watched me. I froze. Their eyes. They weren't human. They glowed with a strange, otherworldly light, cold and predatory. It was as if the darkness itself had taken form. The eyes blinked in unison, and the shadows moved closer, encircling me. The growl turned into something else, something more guttural, more savage, a snarl that echoed through the hallway like a wild animal cornered. I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened. I took a step back, and that's when I realized the shadows weren't just shadows. They were creatures. Twisted forms of something not quite human, their limbs too long, their faces contorted, eyes flashing with hunger. They were closing in. I turned, my feet slipping against the slick floor, but I couldn't run fast enough. One of the figures darted toward me, its movement impossibly quick, like it was already right next to me without having moved at all. It reached out with skeletal fingers, its hand grabbing my wrist with an iron grip. I screamed, "Let go of me!" I shouted, struggling, my heart pounding. The thing didn't respond, it only tilted its head, those glowing eyes studying me with eerie curiosity. I yanked my arm, but its grip only tightened. My vision blurred with panic, and for a moment, I thought I was going to lose consciousness. The growling grew louder, the sound almost deafening, as the other creatures crowded closer. I could hear their claws clicking against the floor, their breath hot on my skin. I knew I was out of time. With a surge of adrenaline, I kicked at the creature's legs, forcing it to stumble back. For a moment, it hesitated, just long enough for me to break free. I ran, not thinking, just moving forward through the endless maze of hallways. My only goal was escape. But every turn I took led me deeper into the hotel. The corridors twisted, impossibly long, like a never-ending labyrinth. The growl was louder now, no longer just behind me, but surrounding me, echoing from all sides. I could feel the creatures closing in. I was going to die here. That thought pierced through the panic that had consumed me. I was trapped in this place, with no way out, no one to help me. I could hear my own breath, shallow and frantic, drowning out everything else. And then, a voice. A whisper, faint but clear, cutting through the darkness. Leave. The word was soft, almost gentle, but it carried a weight that felt like a command. I froze. The growl stopped. The creatures, for a brief moment, went silent. I turned, searching for the source of the voice. But the hallway was empty. No one was there. Leave, the voice repeated, this time clearer, closer. It was coming from the darkness ahead. I stepped forward cautiously, my heart thudding in my chest, unsure whether I should obey. But the voice was insistent. It wasn't a request, it was a warning. I didn't hesitate any longer. I ran toward the source of the voice, my feet pounding the floor, ignoring the creatures that now seemed to fade into the shadows. I could feel their eyes on me, burning into my back, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. And just as I reached the end of the hallway, the door swung open. I didn't stop to question it. I darted through the doorway, the cold night air hitting me like a slap in the face. I had escaped. For now. The door slammed shut behind me, the cold air biting at my skin. I could barely catch my breath, my heart still racing in my chest. I looked around frantically, trying to make sense of where I was. I was outside the hotel, but everything felt wrong. The streets were empty, eerily silent. No cars, no people, not a single sound except the wind. I staggered forward, my mind still reeling. What had I just escaped? What were those things? Shadows, creatures from another world, something unnatural? The images of their glowing eyes, their twisted forms, haunted me. My hands were shaking, my legs weak. The adrenaline that had pushed me forward now left me hollow, empty. I felt like I was still running, like the hotel's walls were still closing in around me, even though I was no longer inside. I tried to steady myself, to breathe normally, but the air felt thick, heavy. The streets were familiar, yet foreign. Something was wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that the hotel wasn't done with me. It had let me go, yes, but for how long? I could still feel its pull, its suffocating presence, like a shadow lingering just beyond the edge of my vision. I turned to look back at the hotel. Its dark silhouette loomed in the distance, a blackened monolith against the starless sky. The windows, once shimmering with light, were now pitch black, like empty eyes watching me. I had to get away. I started walking, my pace quickening as I moved down the sidewalk, each step echoing in the stillness. I wanted to run, but I couldn't bring myself to. The dread weighed me down, kept my movements slow and deliberate. Every corner I turned, every shadow I passed, felt like a trap, a trick, a lie to make me think I had escaped. And then, a sound. At first, it was soft, a distant scrape, like something dragging across pavement. I froze. I turned, my eyes searching the empty street behind me, my pulse quickening again. Nothing. The night was still. Too still. My mind raced, desperately trying to make sense of it. It couldn't be. I was outside. The hotel was behind me. But then, I heard it again. Closer this time. The sound of claws scraping against the concrete. It wasn't just one sound, it was multiple, a low clicking like fingernails on stone. My breath caught in my throat. I turned sharply, but no one was there. No figures, no creatures. Just the empty street, stretching out endlessly ahead of me. The sound came again, louder now, from the alley to my right. I looked in that direction, but all I saw were shadows, twisting in the faint glow of the streetlights. I should have kept walking. I should have run, but something held me there, paralyzed. It was like I was waiting for something. Waiting for it to catch me. Waiting for the inevitable. And then, I saw it. A figure emerging from the darkness. It was too tall to be human, too thin, too distorted. Its body flickered, its edges dissolving into the night. For a moment, it looked like a man, but then the form warped, stretching unnaturally as it shifted, until it became something else entirely, something unearthly. Its eyes gleamed, a cold, alien light that seemed to pierce through the darkness and into my soul. The growl came again, louder, more urgent now. I didn't wait. I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the pavement. I could hear the creatures, those same monstrous things, moving behind me, their claws scraping along the ground in pursuit. The sound was growing closer, louder. I could almost feel their breath on my neck. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. All I wanted was to be as far from the hotel as possible, to escape whatever nightmare I had stumbled into. But no matter how fast I ran, no matter how far I tried to get, I couldn't escape the feeling that the hotel was always there, just behind me, waiting. And then, I reached the end of the block. The street ended at a dead end, a brick wall rising up before me. There was nowhere left to go. My heart hammered in my chest, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The alley behind me was silent now, the scraping sounds gone. But I knew it wasn't over. It couldn't be. The streetlights flickered. The darkness seemed to press in, tightening around me. The air felt colder, heavier, and the shadows stretched unnaturally long. I turned, ready to face whatever was coming, ready to fight or die trying. And then, the wall in front of me shifted. It wasn't a wall anymore. It was the hotel. It was back. The same dark, looming structure, its windows black and lifeless, its door wide open. I could feel it pulling me in, like a vortex, like something ancient and hungry. The door creaked as if inviting me in. I didn't want to go. I couldn't go back in there. But my body moved on its own, my feet carrying me toward the entrance, against my will. I was trapped. There was no escaping it. And then, I understood. The hotel hadn't just been keeping me inside. It had been keeping me in. I was never going to leave. I didn't scream. There was no point in screaming anymore. The door closed behind me with a resounding thud, and the darkness of the hallway swallowed me whole. The creatures were waiting, their eyes gleaming in the blackness, and I knew that this time there would be no escape. I had become part of the hotel, part of its endless maze. The shadows crept closer, and I could hear their growls, their whispers in the darkness, as they closed in around me. I could feel their cold hands on my skin, and I knew that I would never see the light of day again. There would be no rescue, no way out. The hotel had claimed its latest guest. The silence that followed the closing of the door was suffocating. I could feel the weight of it pressing against my chest, making it harder to breathe. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the faint sound of distant whispers seemed to echo through the walls like the remnants of forgotten souls. The creatures were there, just beyond the edges of my vision, their presence more felt than seen. I knew they were watching me. I tried to move, but my feet felt heavy, as though the very ground beneath me was trying to hold me in place. Every step was a struggle, like I was wading through thick mud, and yet the hallway stretched endlessly before me. I couldn't see the end. I couldn't even see the light that had once illuminated the place. Now, it was all darkness, black and suffocating, like the hotel itself had swallowed the last remnants of the world. A soft sound echoed behind me, a faint scraping noise that seemed to reverberate in the air. I turned, heart leaping in my chest. There was nothing there. The hallway was empty. But the sound didn't stop. It continued, slow and deliberate, as though something was moving just out of my line of sight. The whispers grew louder. They weren't just whispers anymore. They were voices, low and guttural, muttering in languages I didn't understand. The sound of claws on the floor began to rise in volume, a rhythmic, scraping cadence that chilled my bones. I knew they were closing in. I stumbled backward, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The walls seemed to pulse around me, alive with some malevolent energy. The hotel was breathing, watching, waiting for me to make the wrong move. Then, a shape emerged from the shadows. At first, it was just a faint silhouette, but as it moved closer, the details became clearer: long, twisted limbs, a body that seemed to ripple and contort with every movement. Its face was a blur, its features constantly shifting, like a reflection in a cracked mirror. I couldn't look away. I wanted to, but I couldn't. My eyes were locked on it, and the closer it got, the more its form seemed to distort. A hand, no, a claw, reached out toward me, its fingers elongated and ending in sharp, jagged tips. My body moved of its own accord. I turned and ran, the sound of my frantic footsteps echoing through the hall. The walls seemed to close in on me, narrowing with every step. I could hear the thing behind me, its breathing growing heavier, its claws scratching the floor in pursuit. I didn't dare look back. I couldn't. But I could feel it, its presence, its hunger, its relentless chase. The hallway twisted, changing as I ran. The walls warped, the ceiling sagged, and the floor beneath me shifted like sand. The hotel was alive, its very structure shifting to trap me. I was running in circles, unable to escape. No matter how fast I moved, I could never outrun the darkness. And then, just as I thought I might collapse from exhaustion, I reached a door. It was old, rusted, its surface marred by time. The handle was cold to the touch, but I grabbed it desperately and yanked it open. Beyond the door was another hallway, darker, narrower, more oppressive than the one I had just left. But I didn't care. I stepped inside, desperate to find a way out, even if it meant running deeper into the maze. The door slammed shut behind me. I was trapped. The creatures were still out there, hunting me, their eyes never leaving me. I had no way of knowing how long I had been running, how many doors I had passed. Time had lost all meaning in the hotel. It was an endless nightmare, a place with no escape. And then, I saw it, a light. A faint, flickering glow at the end of the hallway. Could it be? My heart skipped a beat. I had to get to that light. I had to. It was the only hope left. I ran again, faster this time, ignoring the burning in my legs, ignoring the fear gnawing at my mind. The light grew brighter with every step, but the hallway seemed to stretch farther than I could run. The walls seemed to pull away from me, making the distance between us even greater. I reached out, desperate to touch the light, but just as my fingers brushed the source of it, the floor gave way beneath me. I fell. The air rushed past me, and for a moment, I felt weightless, as though I were falling through an endless void. And then, I hit the ground with a sickening thud. Everything went dark. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in the hotel anymore. I was back at the entrance, standing outside on the cold street, the familiar view of the hotel looming behind me. The city was quiet, but something was different. The air was still thick, like a storm waiting to break. I could feel it. The hotel was still there. It had never really let me go. A voice echoed in my mind, an unsettling whisper, as though the hotel itself was speaking to me, reminding me that I was always its guest. There was no escaping it. I turned to run, but my legs froze. I was paralyzed, unable to move. And then, from the corner of my eye, I saw them, the glowing eyes, staring from the darkened windows of the hotel. They were watching me. Waiting. I didn't scream. There was no point in screaming anymore. The creatures had found me. The hotel had claimed me once again. And this time, it would never let me go. The Legend of the Traitor. It's said that every year, on the night when the wind howls through the streets of St. Louis and the shadows stretch long under the pale moonlight, the spirit of a long-dead traitor returns. He is not seen, but he is felt, the presence of betrayal, as real as the ground beneath your feet. Those who dare to remain in the city on that night are forced to face a reckoning. The city knows this, but there are always those who don't believe, who refuse to heed the warnings. I was one of them. I had heard the stories, of course. Who hasn't? The old tales told in hushed tones in bars and on street corners, passed down like a sick joke. But I never put much stock in them. After all, there's always someone willing to spin a yarn about the unexplainable. It's a comforting way to give shape to the fear we all try to bury deep within us. That was until I found myself standing at the edge of the old cemetery on the outskirts of town, the very place where the legend said the traitor's spirit would manifest. The air was thick with unease. I could feel it, a strange sort of pressure in the atmosphere, like the earth itself was holding its breath. I was here on business, or at least that's what I told myself. But even as I walked down the long, winding path, the weight of the stories seemed to settle over me, like the rustling of dead leaves in the wind, a quiet warning. You're just imagining it, I muttered to myself, trying to shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. I glanced around, but there was no one in sight. The cemetery was eerily silent, the only sound the soft rustle of branches swaying in the wind. But then I heard it. A soft whisper, almost inaudible, like a breath against my ear. Traitor. The word came, clear as day, but there was no one there. I froze. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Just the wind, I told myself. But it wasn't. I could feel it, something was wrong. I started walking faster, my steps quickening as the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Traitor, traitor, the word echoed through the air, bouncing off the gravestones and filling the air with a sense of foreboding. It felt as though the very ground beneath me was whispering. As I reached the old iron gate that marked the entrance to the cemetery, the air grew colder. The moon had risen higher in the sky, casting long, jagged shadows over the gravestones. The night felt alive, but not in a way that was comforting. It was a presence, something ancient, something that had seen too much. I stopped at the gate, staring at the rows of weathered stones. There was a sudden gust of wind, and the whispers stopped. In their place came something else, footsteps. The sound was slow at first, like someone walking in the distance. But as I listened, the steps grew louder, closer. I turned around, but there was nothing there. Only the darkness of the cemetery and the feeling of being watched. I shook my head. "It's just my imagination," I muttered, forcing myself to move. But no matter how fast I walked, the footsteps followed, each one closer than the last. And then I saw it. A figure, standing in the distance, barely visible in the shadows. It was tall, thin, and dressed in tattered clothing. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, it just stood there, watching me. I froze again, my heart pounding in my chest. The air felt heavier now, pressing on me, and I couldn't seem to move. I wanted to run, but my legs refused to obey. The figure took a step forward. That was enough. I turned and bolted, my feet pounding against the ground as I ran toward the gate. The footsteps behind me quickened, the sound of them growing louder and louder, like they were right behind me. I reached for the gate, but it was locked. Panic surged through me. My breath was coming in ragged gasps, and my hands shook as I fumbled for the latch. The figure was closer now, just a few feet away. I could feel the cold, the presence of it, like ice crawling under my skin. My heart raced in my chest, and the world around me seemed to narrow, the darkness closing in on all sides. And then, just as I thought I would be caught, the gate swung open. I stumbled through, barely managing to catch myself as I fell to the ground. The footsteps stopped. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just kept running, my body trembling with fear. As I reached the safety of the street, I forced myself to slow down, trying to calm my racing heart. The whispers stopped. The footsteps stopped. But I knew, deep down, that whatever I had felt in that cemetery wasn't over. It was only beginning. The legend of the traitor wasn't a story. It was real. And now, I was part of it. The night still echoed with the whispers, but now, I couldn't escape the feeling that the traitor had seen something in me. Something I didn't want to face. And every year, as the anniversary approached, I could feel the air growing heavier, the shadows growing longer. The curse had marked me, and there was no escaping it. The days after the incident were a blur. I kept telling myself that I was just shaken up, that the fear was nothing more than my mind playing tricks on me. But the closer the anniversary of the traitor's return came, the more I began to feel the weight of something I couldn't shake off. The whispers. They were still there, lingering in the back of my mind like a shadow I couldn't escape. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure standing in the cemetery, its eyes hidden in the darkness, but somehow feeling like they were always watching me. I couldn't go anywhere without feeling it, a presence that followed me, silent but suffocating. At work, I found myself distracted. My coworkers noticed it, too. They whispered among themselves, but I could see the concern in their eyes. Something was wrong. I had tried to brush it off, but the more I denied it, the more real it felt. One night, just days before the anniversary, I found myself standing at the window of my apartment, staring out at the city below. The streetlights cast long, stretching shadows across the sidewalks, and the sound of distant traffic filled the air. But there was something wrong with the quiet. It wasn't peaceful. It was watchful. "Get a grip," I muttered to myself, running a hand through my hair. But as I turned away from the window, I froze. The whispers. They were here again. I had thought they were just in my head, but now I could hear them clearly. Low and urgent. "Traitor, traitor." The voice was the same as before, faint but unmistakable. It seemed to come from every corner of the room. I wanted to ignore it, to pretend it wasn't happening. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I knew the spirit wasn't just haunting me, it was trying to get my attention. I glanced around the room, but there was no one there. The silence felt oppressive, like the air had thickened around me. My heart started to race as I backed toward the door, my mind screaming at me to leave, to get out of the apartment and away from whatever was making that sound. As I reached for the doorknob, I heard something else, a soft scurrying noise, like claws clicking against wood. I turned, expecting to see some rodent or a stray cat, but there was nothing there. But then, I noticed the shadows. They were wrong. They stretched in ways they shouldn't, twisting and curling along the walls in unnatural shapes. And at the edge of the room, near the corner by the window, something moved. A dark shape, a silhouette that shifted in the corner of my vision. I blinked, trying to focus, but when I opened my eyes, it was gone. I wasn't alone. I could feel it now, the presence in the room with me, something malevolent, watching, waiting. I needed to leave. But as I reached for the door again, the whispers grew louder. They filled my head, a chorus of voices, all chanting the same word, traitor. The walls seemed to close in around me, the shadows pressing in, swallowing the light. I turned to face the room, my eyes darting to the corners, searching for the source of the sound. But there was nothing there. Nothing but the oppressive darkness. Then, the scratching began. It started soft, barely audible. But it didn't stop. It grew louder, more frantic, until it felt like claws were digging into the walls themselves, tearing through the very fabric of the apartment. I covered my ears, trying to block out the noise, but it was useless. It was inside my head now, consuming me. I could feel my sanity slipping. Was it real? Was I going crazy? I had to be. No one else could hear this. No one else could feel this. Then, I saw them. Two glowing eyes, faint but unmistakable, staring at me from the corner of the room. They were too large, too bright, like two beacons in the darkness. I froze. My breath caught in my throat as I realized whatever was here, whatever had been following me, was no longer just a whisper or a shadow. It was real. The eyes blinked. And then it came. A shape, tall and thin, stepped out from the shadows. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, like it didn't belong in this world. I could feel the air growing colder, the temperature dropping with every step it took. I stumbled backward, my body moving without thinking, but my feet couldn't keep up. I crashed into the wall, and the figure stopped. Its head tilted, as if studying me, before it took another step forward. The whispers grew louder, 1,000 voices crashing together in my mind. Traitor, traitor, traitor. They were coming from everywhere, surrounding me, suffocating me. I couldn't escape. I turned to the door, throwing it open with all the strength I had, and I ran. I ran through the darkened halls of the building, down the stairs, into the streets, but no matter how far I went, I couldn't outrun it. The footsteps, the whispers, the eyes, they were always there, always behind me. I didn't know how long I ran. Time had lost all meaning. But eventually, I found myself at the cemetery again, the place where it all began. I had no choice but to go in. The figure followed me, its presence growing stronger with every step I took. As I stood in the graveyard, the ground beneath my feet seemed to pulse, alive with some ancient power. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The figure loomed before me, its glowing eyes fixed on me, and the whispers died down to a single, chilling word, traitor. And then I understood. The curse wasn't just for those who had betrayed, it was for anyone who had ever felt the guilt of betrayal, who had ever allowed darkness into their hearts. The spirit didn't need to prove anything to me. It didn't need to hurt me. All it needed was for me to see the truth of my own conscience. The figure reached out, and the world around me went black. I woke up in darkness, not the same kind of darkness I had been running from, but a thick, suffocating blackness that seemed to stretch on forever. The air was heavy, still, and cold, and for a moment, I couldn't remember where I was, or how I had gotten there. I tried to move, but my body felt like lead. My mind raced as I fought to break free from the confusion. The memory of the figure in the cemetery flooded back to me in an instant, the glowing eyes, the whispers, the overwhelming sense of doom. I wasn't alone. A shiver ran down my spine as I slowly sat up, the damp ground cold against my hands. My fingers scraped against something hard, and I froze. The texture was familiar, stone. I was in a graveyard, but it wasn't the same one I had known. The air around me seemed thicker here, like it was pressed down by some invisible weight. I could feel the ground trembling slightly beneath me. Someone was near. Get up, I whispered to myself, my voice trembling as I forced myself to stand. The wind howled around me, carrying with it a scent of decay. I glanced around, trying to make sense of the surroundings, but everything was unfamiliar. There were no familiar landmarks, no comforting markers to guide me. Just rows upon rows of gravestones, all of them cracked and withered. The shadows seemed to shift unnaturally. They weren't simply cast by the dim light of the moon, they moved, swaying as though they had a life of their own. And then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it again. A figure. The same one. Its tall, gaunt shape emerged from the darkness, just like before. This time, however, it wasn't standing still. It was moving toward me with slow, deliberate steps, its limbs contorting in unnatural angles. Its face, if it could even be called a face, was hidden in shadow, but the glowing eyes pierced the darkness like twin lanterns, drawing me in. I took a step back, my breath quickening. The whispers started again, louder this time, echoing in my mind. Traitor, traitor, traitor. They were the same words I had heard before, but now they didn't just fill the air, they filled my very soul. The weight of guilt, the crushing weight of my own conscience, pressed down on me. Who are you? I gasped, trying to steady my trembling voice. The figure didn't answer, but it didn't need to. It didn't need words. It was the embodiment of everything I had ever feared, every regret, every failure. It was the spirit of the one I had betrayed. In that moment, I realized the truth. The curse wasn't about punishment, it was about awakening something inside me. Something dark and hidden. The figure wasn't just seeking revenge, it was forcing me to face the consequences of my actions. Leave me alone, I whispered, my voice breaking as I staggered backward. I didn't mean it. I didn't know. But the spirit didn't care. It moved closer, its footsteps soundless, yet I could feel the tremor in the ground with each one. My pulse raced as I tried to run, but the graveyard seemed endless. The more I moved, the more the shadows stretched around me, trapping me in their grasp. Suddenly, the air grew cold. I felt it in my bones, a coldness that wasn't just physical. It was the cold of isolation, the cold of guilt that had buried itself deep inside me. The figure stopped. It was so close now that I could almost feel its presence pressing against me, suffocating me. "You can't escape," the voice in my mind whispered, but it wasn't the voice of the figure. It was my own voice, tainted with guilt. "You've never escaped it. You never will." The ground beneath me trembled once more, and I looked down, my heart stopping as I saw what was happening. The earth was shifting, as though it was alive, as though it was reaching for me, pulling me down into its cold, dark embrace. I tried to move, but my legs felt like they were made of stone. I was rooted to the spot, unable to escape. And then, I saw it, shimmering in the darkness, faint at first but growing brighter with each passing second. A mirror. I didn't want to look, didn't want to see what it showed me. But I had no choice. I forced my gaze to the surface of the mirror, and what I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't just my reflection. It was my past, my betrayal. The face of the one I had wronged, the one I had hurt, stared back at me with eyes full of anguish and accusation. "I didn't mean to," I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. "I didn't know." But the face didn't respond. It didn't need to. The mirror reflected the truth that I had been running from for so long. My guilt had never left me. It had always been there, hiding in the shadows, waiting for me to face it. The figure stepped closer, and as it did, the mirror shattered, the pieces flying out and disappearing into the darkness. I was alone. But I wasn't. The truth was now laid bare before me. The curse wasn't just about a ghost or a spirit, it was about the betrayal I had committed, the one I had never been able to forgive myself for. And now, there was no escaping it. I was trapped in the graveyard of my own guilt. The world seemed to hold its breath. The shattered pieces of the mirror hung in the air for a moment longer, reflecting broken fragments of the truth I had spent my whole life avoiding. The figure was closer now, its cold presence like a vice around my chest. I couldn't move. The darkness seemed to close in around me, suffocating, as if the earth itself was conspiring against me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My mouth was dry, my legs too weak to carry me, my hands trembling at my sides. "You cannot run from yourself," the voice in my head spoke again, louder this time, like a shout from deep within my own soul. "You can never escape." The figure was right in front of me now. Its glowing eyes pierced the dark, a cold fire burning within them. Its form loomed over me, almost impossible to focus on, as if it were constantly shifting, growing larger, then shrinking, then growing larger again, a fluid entity without true shape. I couldn't breathe. The whispers began again, but this time they weren't just words, they were visions. Fragments of memories I had long buried rose to the surface. My betrayal, the lie I had told, the promise I had broken. I saw the face of the person I had wronged, their eyes filled with confusion, hurt, and ultimately, resignation. "Why?" The word echoed in my mind, and I could almost hear it spoken by them, a voice from the past that had never truly left. I closed my eyes, shaking my head in an attempt to block out the pain, the weight of my own failure. But it was too late. The truth had already taken root. "Please," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I didn't mean it." I was young, naive. I didn't understand. But the figure didn't respond. It simply watched me, its eyes growing brighter, as if burning through my soul. The darkness around me deepened, and the ground beneath me cracked, sending splinters of earth flying into the air. The tombstones around me began to sway, their marble surfaces growing as if they, too, were alive, trapped in the same curse I was. The sky above was no longer black, but a swirling mass of reds and purples, an unnatural glow reflecting the rage of the earth itself. I felt the heat rising from the ground, not the heat of fire, but of something darker, something ancient. The figure moved again, its body seemingly dissolving into the shadows, before reforming in front of me, so close I could feel its icy breath. "It's not enough to regret," it said, its voice like 1,000 whispers in my ear. "You must face the consequences. You must pay for what you've done." I knew what it meant. I had lived my entire life trying to run from my past, to ignore the weight of my actions, to bury my guilt so deep it would never surface. But it was impossible. The curse was never just about the past. It was about making me face what I had done, what I had destroyed, and what I had cost. My heart was pounding now, as I felt the walls of the graveyard closing in. The tombstones leaned forward, as if reaching toward me, their shadows stretching to touch me. The ground beneath my feet was no longer solid, it was soft, like quicksand, pulling me deeper with each passing moment. I could feel the presence of the figure growing stronger, its gaze more intense, as if it could see into every corner of my soul. It had no need for words anymore. I could feel the judgment in the very air around me. "I didn't mean it," I gasped again, my voice breaking. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I was scared. I was selfish." The figure moved closer still, its form now so close I could feel the coldness of it against my skin. And then it stopped. For a moment, there was silence. "You are not alone in your guilt," the figure said at last, its voice soft, almost compassionate. "You never have been." I didn't understand at first. But then, like a flash of lightning, the truth hit me. The curse, the haunting, it wasn't just about my betrayal. It was about the ripple effect, the people I had hurt, the lives I had changed in my selfish pursuit. The spirit of the one I had wronged wasn't alone in its wrath. It was joined by every person I had abandoned, every life I had broken, every trust one had shattered. They were all part of the curse, all seeking retribution for the damage I had caused. I had been the traitor, but now I was part of a far larger web of betrayal, a network of hurt and pain that stretched far beyond my own actions. The spirits of the people I had wronged were now with me, closing in around me, their eyes accusing, their voices whispering in the darkness. "You will never escape," they murmured in unison. "You will always carry this with you." The world tilted. The ground beneath me gave way entirely, and I found myself falling, tumbling through a void of darkness. The shadows reached up to claim me, dragging me deeper into the earth. And as I fell, the last thing I heard was the whisper of the figure, now a faint memory in my mind. "Now you understand." I woke with a start, gasping for air, my heart thundering in my chest. The weight of the curse, the vision of the betrayal, still pressed on me, like a stone lodged deep in my soul. My eyes snapped open, but I wasn't sure where I was. The surroundings were unfamiliar. I was in a small, dimly lit room. The air felt cold, and the walls were damp. For a moment, I wondered if I had died and was now somewhere between life and death. My limbs felt heavy, and the shadows seemed to move of their own accord, swirling just beyond the edge of my sight. I sat up, blinking away the remnants of the dream, or was it real? I couldn't tell. The memories were still fresh, as if they had happened only seconds ago. But no, this couldn't be real. The curse had ended. The spirits had gone. Hadn't they? I rubbed my face with trembling hands. I needed to get out of here. I needed to leave this place, this suffocating prison. I rose unsteadily to my feet, the floor cold beneath my bare feet. As I looked around, I saw that the room was sparse: a wooden table, a single chair, and a cracked window through which only faint light filtered. I took a step forward, and then froze. The door. It was ajar, just slightly, but enough to reveal a shadow standing in the doorway. I hadn't heard any footsteps, but there it was, a figure. The same figure from my nightmare. It was real. I could feel the air grow thick with dread, the coldness seeping through my skin, down to my bones. The figure, once a shifting presence in the shadows, now stood clearly before me. The glowing eyes, the ghostly shape, it was all too familiar. "You thought you could escape," the figure whispered, its voice carrying the weight of every memory, every wrong I had ever committed. "But you can't run from what you've done. Not now. Not ever." I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. I was paralyzed, caught in the gaze of the specter. The walls around me seemed to close in again, tightening, pushing me toward the edge. The truth. I had faced it, but I hadn't truly understood. "You can never escape the consequences," the figure continued, its voice echoing in my mind. "You will always remember, always feel the weight of what you've done." I tried to move, to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. The room seemed to shrink, the shadows pressing in around me, the walls cracking, the floor giving way. I was falling again, but this time there was no void beneath me, only the suffocating presence of the figure and the memories I could never outrun. The shadows whispered, louder now, voices I couldn't ignore. They came from everywhere, beneath the floorboards, above the ceiling, from the dark corners of the room. They were the voices of the past, the voices of those I had wronged. "I didn't mean it," I whispered, my voice trembling. I was lost. I didn't know. But the figure didn't speak anymore. It just stood there, watching, waiting. And I realized then that there was no forgiveness, no redemption. Not anymore. The consequences were already in motion, the chain of my own mistakes stretching out behind me, too long and too heavy to escape. "Leave me alone," I screamed, finally finding my voice, my panic reaching its peak. I'd paid. I'd faced it. "Let me go." The figure's eyes glowed brighter, the shadows deepened, and in that moment, I understood. There was no escape. There was only the endless cycle of guilt, of never being free from the weight of the past. The spirits of those I had betrayed were not gone. They had never left. They were part of me, living within me, always waiting to remind me of what I had done. And just as I thought I might be swallowed whole by the darkness, the ground beneath me finally gave way. I fell. But this time, I didn't scream. I accepted it. The fall, the darkness, the curse, it was all part of me now. The Dead City. I never thought I would be in a place like this. The kind of place that shouldn't exist, but somehow, here I am. Lost, or maybe found, in a town I thought had vanished a long time ago. I remember hearing about it once, in whispers, but that was years ago. Forgotten, like a bad dream you try to forget but can't. The air feels wrong here, thick and heavy. The streets are silent, too silent. There's a faint smell of decay in the wind, something old and buried. The buildings are crumbling, windows shattered, their insides empty and hollow. But they're not abandoned. Not completely. I can't tell if it's the memories haunting me or something else, something more real, that makes me feel like I'm being watched. I don't like it. My wife, Emma, is walking ahead of me, her steps echoing through the quiet street, unaware of the strange feeling crawling under my skin. This place, it's not right, Ryan, she says, stopping to look around, her voice breaking the unnatural silence. I stop beside her, my hand brushing the rough stone of an old building. The bricks are cold and damp. It's not, I admit, my voice barely a whisper. I try to convince myself that it's just my imagination running wild, but deep down, I know this isn't just a town that's fallen into disrepair. Something happened here, something that's still hanging in the air like a forgotten memory. Do you hear that? Emma asks, her face pale as she strains to listen. I turn my head, trying to place the sound. It's faint, but unmistakable, the soft shuffle of footsteps somewhere far behind us. Maybe it's just an animal, I say, though even I don't believe it. The sound doesn't fit. It's too slow, deliberate. As if someone, something, follows us at a pace that's too steady to be anything normal. We keep walking, the noise growing louder with each step. The tension is suffocating. I try to focus on the surroundings, looking for something, anything, that can explain why I feel this sick, suffocating dread. There's nothing familiar about this place, but at the same time, everything feels oddly close. As though this place is somehow tied to me, a place I should have left long ago, but couldn't escape. The further we walk, the more the air grows thick with something I can't quite place. The light seems wrong too. It's like dusk, but it's not the time of day. It's as if the sun is trapped, caught somewhere in between night and day, too weak to shine properly. Ryan, we need to leave, Emma says suddenly, her voice shaking now. I glance at her, but before I can answer, the sound behind us stops. A shiver runs down my spine. It's gone. The footsteps. But the air feels different. Then, from somewhere far down the street, I see it. A shape. At first, it's just a dark shadow in the distance, but as it moves closer, I realize it's not just a shadow. It's a figure. My heart races. The figure is tall, thin, almost skeletal. Its movements are slow, deliberate, and there's something wrong about the way it moves, too jerky, like a marionette controlled by unseen strings. Ryan, Emma whispers, her breath catching in her throat. What is that? I don't know. The figure is getting closer, too close now. I can feel my heart pounding in my chest, the air growing colder, heavier. There's something wrong with this town. I can feel it. I take Emma's hand, pulling her away, but she's frozen, staring at the approaching figure. She doesn't seem to see the danger. Emma! I shout, shaking her, snapping her out of her trance. We need to go. Now! She doesn't move. I glance around frantically. The streets are empty, save for us and the figure slowly coming toward us. There's no one else. No help. The figure reaches the end of the street and stops. It stands there, unmoving. Then it tilts its head to one side, and I hear a sound. A low, guttural growl. A sound that chills me to the bone. It's not human. Ryan, Emma says again, but this time there's a terror in her voice that I can't ignore. We're not supposed to be here. I don't know how to answer her. I want to run, but I can't make myself move. And then, the figure smiles. The smile on the figure's face is twisted, unnatural. Its teeth gleam like broken glass, jagged and sharp. My body freezes. I can't move. The only sound is the cold, hollow wind that sweeps through the broken streets around us. Ryan, Emma whispers again, her voice barely audible, shaking with fear. Her eyes are wide, fixed on the creature in front of us. What is it? I try to speak, but my throat feels tight, as though something is pressing against it. I force myself to breathe, to think, but all I can do is stare at that thing standing there, motionless. The figure doesn't move. It doesn't need to. It's as if it's watching us, studying us, waiting for something. Its head tilts again, and the movement is so grotesque, so wrong, that I can almost feel the bones in its neck grinding with every inch. It seems to be savoring the silence, relishing in our terror. Suddenly, a loud scraping sound breaks the stillness, like claws dragging across concrete. The figure's hand moves, slowly at first, then faster, the jagged fingers scratching against the pavement. I blink, and in that moment, the shape flickers. For a fraction of a second, it seems to vanish entirely, swallowed by the air around it. And then, just as quickly, it reappears closer. Too close. I snap out of my paralysis, my heart pounding in my chest. Emma, run! I yell, grabbing her by the arm, pulling her toward the nearest alleyway. We move as fast as we can, our footsteps echoing against the crumbling walls. The alley is narrow, dark, and the air is thick with the smell of mold and decay. We round a corner, and for a moment, I think we've escaped. But then I hear it. The unmistakable sound of shuffling footsteps, faint but unmistakable. It's following us. I stop, listening. The creature's steps are slow, deliberate. It doesn't seem to hurry, almost as if it's enjoying the chase. We can't outrun it, Emma says, her voice filled with despair. What is it? What does it want? I don't have an answer. I wish I did. The uncertainty gnaws at me, consuming my thoughts, and I begin to question everything. Is this real? Or is it some kind of hallucination? I glance over my shoulder, and I see it again, just a shadow at first, but then clearer, sharper. The creature is no longer a distant figure. It's right behind us, standing just out of reach. I can see its eyes now, pale, lifeless, glowing faintly in the dark. The growl comes again, low and rumbling, vibrating through the air, and I feel it deep in my chest. It's not just a sound. It's a presence. Suddenly, the alley seems smaller, suffocating. The walls feel as though they're closing in. I hear the creature's breath now, slow and heavy, like it's savoring the moment. I try to run, but my legs won't move. It's as if the ground beneath me has turned to stone. Ryan, we need to leave, now, Emma pleads, her voice breaking. I can't think. I can't focus. I only know one thing, we're trapped. The creature is getting closer, and there's nowhere to hide. I turn to face Emma, hoping to find some reassurance, but when I look at her, her eyes are wide with terror. She's not looking at me anymore. She's staring past me, her gaze locked on something behind me. I don't want to turn around. I don't want to see it. But I have no choice. I turn slowly, dread creeping up my spine. And there it is. The creature is standing just a few feet away. Its smile is wider now, stretching impossibly across its face, as if it's enjoying our fear. I can hear its breathing, ragged and wet, its chest heating with some unseen hunger. The air around it feels cold, too cold, like the breath of the grave. I know we can't outrun it. We can't escape. We're going to die here, Emma whispers, her voice cracking. I grab her hand, desperate. No, we can't. We have to fight. We have to survive. But in my heart, I know the truth. We're already dead. This place is the grave. And whatever that thing is, it's here to claim us. The creature takes another step forward, its eyes gleaming, and then it speaks, its voice a rasping, guttural sound, barely human. You shouldn't have come here. And then, with a sound like cracking bone, it lunges. The creature's movement is faster than anything I could have anticipated. One moment, it's standing just a few feet away, its presence so oppressive I can taste the fear in the air, and the next, it's upon us, its skeletal fingers reaching for us with alarming speed. I barely have time to react. I hear Emma scream, a sharp, high-pitched cry that rings in my ears, and then everything goes dark. The world around me tilts as I'm yanked off my feet, the ground beneath me crumbling away. I can feel the creature's breath against my skin, cold and rancid. It smells of rot, of death long forgotten. My chest tightens, the air being sucked out of my lungs as I struggle to break free, but its grip is unrelenting. Emma! I shout, but my voice is lost in the chaos, swallowed by the darkness. I try to pull myself from the creature's grasp, my fingers scrambling for anything solid, but there's nothing. I'm weightless, falling into the unknown, and the only thing that remains is that horrid rasping, the sound of a presence far too unnatural to comprehend. Then, just as quickly as it began, the grip loosens. I feel a sudden drop, and I crash onto cold, damp concrete. My body shudders with the impact, and for a moment, everything goes quiet. But the silence is fleeting. I scramble to my feet, hands shaking as I push myself up. The cold air bites at my skin, and I take a quick look around, trying to make sense of my surroundings. Where am I? The walls are jagged, cracked, as though the entire structure is collapsing inward. Faint light flickers from broken pipes overhead, casting strange shadows on the ground. I realize we're no longer in the alley, but somewhere else entirely, somewhere beneath the city. Emma, where's Emma? I turn in a panic, but there's no sign of her. My heart races in my chest as I stagger forward, the desperation building with every step. The place feels like a maze, a twisted underworld that seems to go on forever. The deeper I go, the darker it gets, and the further I feel from the reality I once knew. And then, I hear it again. The unmistakable sound of shuffling footsteps, too close, too deliberate. I freeze. I know what it is. The creature. It's here. A low growl rumbles through the walls, vibrating the ground beneath me. The air grows heavier, suffocating, as if the very atmosphere is thickening with dread. I hear the clinking of metal, a sound like chains dragging across the floor, and then, a whisper. Run. The voice is distorted, but unmistakably Emma's. I don't hesitate. Panic surges through me, propelling my legs forward. I dash down the corridor, not knowing where I'm going, only that I have to move. The sound of my footsteps mingles with the thumping of my heart, both echoing off the walls in a desperate rhythm. I hear the creature again. Closer this time. Its breath is sharp, ragged, almost like it's laughing. It's playing with us. The thought strikes me, and I can't shake it. It's been toying with us from the beginning. Everything, the town, the shadows, the whispers, it was all part of some twisted game. And now, it's closing in. My legs are burning. I can't breathe. I need to find Emma. But the tunnel seems endless, stretching on and on, with no exit in sight. I turn a corner, my mind racing, and then I stop. There, standing at the far end of the tunnel, is Emma. Her face is pale, her eyes wide with terror, and she's not moving. Emma! I shout, relief flooding my chest as I run toward her. But she doesn't respond. She just stands there, motionless, staring at something in the darkness behind me. I stop, dread seeping into my bones. The shadows around her seem to shift, becoming denser, more alive. The growl is louder now, and I know, deep down, that it's too late. I turn slowly, my body frozen in place. There it is again, the creature. Its eyes glow with an unnatural, sickly light. Its smile widens, impossibly wide, stretching across its face until it seems to consume all of its features. The darkness around it seems to bend, to warp, as though it's pulling everything into itself. I can't run anymore. My feet feel glued to the floor, my body too heavy to move. I hear Emma's voice again, this time clearer, more frantic. Ryan. Run. But I can't. The terror has frozen me in place. The creature takes a step forward, its claws scraping against the concrete, the sound like nails on a chalkboard. And then it speaks, its voice a rasping, guttural whisper that echoes in the emptiness of the tunnel. You should have stayed dead. And in that moment, I know what it wants. It doesn't just want us gone. It wants to make us part of this place, to become lost, like everything else here. To disappear, forgotten and twisted in its darkness. A cold rush of air sweeps past me, and I feel the grip of the creature closing in. There's no escape. No hope. And in that final moment, when the creature lunges, everything goes black. When I wake, the world feels wrong. I'm not sure where I am, but I'm not in the tunnel anymore. The air is thick, heavy, almost suffocating. My skin feels cold, and I can hear the soft drip of water somewhere nearby, like the slow ticking of time, marking every second of my life as it slips away. I try to move, but my body won't respond. It's like I'm bound, trapped in a dream that refuses to end. Panic surges through me, but it's sluggish, distant, like I'm watching myself from a place far away. Emma? I croak, my voice raspy and weak. There's no answer. I force my eyes open, squinting against the dark, trying to make sense of the blurred shapes around me. Everything is dim, a dull gray that swallows all the light. I try to lift my hand, but it feels as though my arm weighs 1,000 pounds, and it takes all of my strength just to inch it forward. The first thing I notice is the silence. It's absolute. There are no distant growls, no sounds of scuttling rats or scraping claws. Just nothing. And then, I see it. A figure, standing at the edge of the darkness. It's her. Emma. Or at least, I think it's her. Her hair is tangled and wild, her face pale, like a shadow of the person I once knew. She doesn't move, doesn't even blink as she stares into the void, her eyes wide and empty. Emma? I try again, this time with more force, but she doesn't respond. Something about her, about the way she stands there, sends a chill through me, deeper than anything I've felt before. I can't explain it. There's something wrong with her. She's not the same. I don't know how to describe it, but it's as if the person I'm looking at isn't Emma at all, but something pretending to be her. I'm not sure whether I should approach her or stay back. The tension builds in my chest, and my legs shake as I try to push myself up to get closer to her. But the moment I make a sound, a sharp crack echoes through the room, and Emma turns her head slowly, unnaturally so, like her neck is bent in a way that shouldn't be possible. Her eyes lock onto mine. They're hollow. Empty. I freeze. My heart stutters in my chest. Emma? I whisper again, my voice trembling. But she doesn't speak. She just stares at me, her expression blank, as if she doesn't recognize me, as if I'm not even there. I want to move closer, to shake her, to make her snap out of whatever trance she's in. But my body refuses to obey. I feel paralyzed, trapped in place, and I know, deep down, that if I get too close, something terrible will happen. The silence stretches on, unbearable. And then, just as quickly as it started, the air shifts, the temperature drops, and I hear it. A sound. A whisper, distant at first, but then growing louder. It's low, guttural, almost like a growl. My breath catches in my throat as I realize what it is. The creature. It's here. I turn around, my heart racing, but there's nothing. Just the endless void of darkness, stretching out in all directions. The whisper grows louder, closer, and my body trembles uncontrollably. I know it's watching me. Emma's eyes never leave me as the growl intensifies, and a chill runs down my spine. She's not moving. She's not reacting. But she knows what's coming. The creature is near. And this time, I can't escape. I feel a sudden pressure in my chest, a weight like the very air around me is turning to lead. It's impossible to breathe. The growl is so close now, deafening in its proximity. My legs are shaking, my body weak, and I know with every fiber of my being that I'm about to meet my end. A flicker of movement catches my eye. I glance over my shoulder again, and there, in the shadows, the creature emerges. It's bigger than before. Larger. Towering. Its eyes glow, a sickly yellow, its mouth a wide, twisted grin that stretches across its face like some horrific mockery of a human smile. Its teeth are sharp, jagged, like broken glass, gleaming in the darkness. And it's looking right at me. I can't move. I can't speak. My throat feels tight, as if my own fear is choking me from the inside. I want to run, but my feet won't move. My mind is screaming, but all I hear is that growl, getting closer, closer with every passing second. The creature takes a step forward, its claws scraping against the floor, dragging a sound like nails across a chalkboard. I can't take it anymore. Run, I whisper to myself, but I know it's already too late. But just as it reaches out for me, just as its claws graze the air above my head, something shifts. I feel it, like a crack in the fabric of reality itself. The darkness seems to stretch, to warp and twist, and for a brief moment, everything freezes. The creature stops. Emma's eyes remain locked on me. And then, in the stillness, I hear it, a voice. Quiet, but unmistakable. Run. It's Emma. Her voice is faint, barely audible, but it carries with it a sense of urgency, of finality. I don't think. I just move. I push myself up with every ounce of strength I have left, ignoring the pain, ignoring the fear, and I run. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know how I'm going to survive this. But one thing is clear. If I stop, I'm done. We're both done. I sprint, my heart hammering in my chest, my feet pounding against the cold, unforgiving ground. And as I look over my shoulder one last time, I see it, the creature, still standing in the dark, its eyes burning into mine, the twisted grin still stretching across its face. And then, everything goes black. I don't know how much time passes. Seconds? Minutes? Hours? It feels like the world is slipping away, like I'm caught in some endless loop of fear and darkness. The blackness is all-consuming, and for a moment, I wonder if I've already died, if this is what comes after an eternal void, a never-ending chase. But then, I feel the cold concrete under my palms. I hear the frantic rush of my own breath, ragged and desperate. I force my eyes open, the light too harsh for a moment, blinding. I squint, trying to adjust, but everything seems wrong, distorted. Where am I? I push myself up, my knees trembling beneath me. I'm in a hallway. A tunnel, but not the one I remember. The walls are cracked and worn, like they've been here for centuries, and the air is thick with dust, the taste of decay. There are no windows, no doors, just endless stone stretching ahead and behind me. I should be running, I know that. But I can't make my legs move. My mind is foggy, disconnected. It feels like I've been running forever, but the terror, the sense of doom, is still there. It's following me. I know it. The growl from before, it's still there, deep in my chest, echoing like a distant memory, a haunting sound that refuses to let go. And then I hear it. A rustling, faint at first, but unmistakable. A scurrying sound, like something large moving swiftly through the shadows, coming toward me. I freeze. It's here. The creature. It's right behind me. I can hear its breathing now, ragged, like it's struggling to catch its breath. But it's not human. It's something darker, something older. Something that shouldn't be. I take a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but my heart races. I look over my shoulder, the cold sweat on my skin making my shirt stick to my back. Nothing. But the sound is louder now, and I know. I know it's watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. I take one step forward, then another. My legs are unsteady, my body is trembling, but I force myself to keep moving. I don't know why I'm still alive. I don't know why I haven't collapsed yet. It feels like I'm running on pure instinct now, the fear pushing me forward even as my mind screams at me to stop. I pass a row of old, rusted pipes on the wall, the air thick with the scent of mildew. The whispers of the creature grow louder. Closer. I can feel it breathing down my neck, and I know that if I look back again, I'll see its glowing eyes. I push forward. The tunnel twists and turns, stretching into what feels like infinity. The walls close in around me, and I feel like I'm suffocating in this endless, dark labyrinth. I want to scream, to break down, but something deep inside me tells me that if I stop, if I let myself give in, it will be the end. I hear a scraping sound, sharp and grating, like claws against stone. The creature is near, too near. I glance to my right. A door. A small, metal door, barely visible in the dim light, almost swallowed by the shadows. I don't think. I don't stop to wonder what's behind it. I rushed toward it, my heart in my throat, every step a desperate plea for survival. My fingers grasp the handle. It's cold, slick with moisture. I turn it, pulling the door open with a creak that sends a jolt of panic through me. I don't wait. I don't look back. I step inside, slamming the door behind me. It's dark. The air is thick with the smell of old wood and dust, but it feels safer here. The creature can't reach me. Not here. I collapse to the ground, panting, my hands shaking uncontrollably. My head spins as I try to catch my breath, the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. I don't know how long I stay like that, curled on the floor, unable to move, unable to think. And then, I hear it. A whisper. Soft, almost imperceptible, but there. Help me. I freeze. The voice. It's Emma. But it's not the voice I remember. It's wrong, broken, fractured, like a shadow of itself. I try to stand, but my legs feel like they're made of jelly. I stumble forward, the words echoing in my mind, guiding me through the darkness. Emma? I call out, my voice shaking, but there's no answer. I take another step, then another. The sound of my own breathing is deafening in the silence. The walls feel like they're closing in again, the space smaller with every movement I make. The room is bare, nothing more than cracked walls and dust. But as I take one last step toward the back of the room, I notice something. A figure. A shadow, standing motionless against the far wall. Emma? I whisper again, but the figure doesn't move. I step closer, my heart pounding in my chest, a cold dread filling my stomach. The shadow doesn't react, doesn't speak, doesn't even breathe. And then, just as I reach out, just as I feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end, I realize something. It's not Emma. It's me. The figure in the corner is me. A pale, ghostly version of myself, staring back at me with eyes that are hollow, empty. I stagger back, my hands flying to my mouth as the world tilts, spins, falls apart. I want to scream, but the words catch in my throat. The realization hits me like a blow to the chest. I'm not escaping. I never was. This place, it's not just a tunnel. It's a trap. And I'm not going anywhere. I'm already dead. The day that never came. It all started on Tuesday, a day that would eventually mean nothing to anyone. The kind of day that you forget as quickly as you wake up from it. At least, that's how it felt before the sun went dark. I was living in a small town in Texas, nestled between the sprawling fields and the dusty roads that led to nowhere in particular. The town had its usual hum, old trucks rumbling down the main street, people chatting in the grocery store, the sound of children's laughter echoing from the park. The kind of place where nothing unexpected ever really happened. Nothing until the eclipse. It was supposed to be a simple astronomical event, just another solar eclipse, one of those things that scientists talk about and the town's kids would watch with the kind of awe that comes from seeing something rare and strange. They gave us special glasses to look at it, and everyone gathered outside, staring at the sky in quiet amazement. But there was something wrong from the very start. As the moon began its slow crawl over the sun, a thick, unnatural hush fell over the town. The birds stopped chirping, the wind ceased its usual rustling through the trees, and for a brief, terrifying moment, everything stood still. The kind of silence that felt like it was pressing down on you, suffocating you. I watched, mesmerized, as the darkness grew. It wasn't like the soft shadow of a normal eclipse. No, this was different. It wasn't just the sky that darkened, it felt like the world itself was being swallowed whole by something vast, something that didn't belong. The shadows stretched unnaturally long, like dark fingers reaching toward the earth. The temperature dropped so suddenly that you could see your breath. And then, for a brief moment, the eclipse was complete. The sky turned an eerie shade of black, the sun nothing more than a thin sliver of light surrounded by an unholy corona. It wasn't like anything I had seen before, and for reasons I couldn't explain, it unsettled me. I looked around at the people standing beside me. They were silent, too, their eyes wide with something I couldn't name. It was like we were all waiting for something to happen. Something big. And then it did. At the exact moment the eclipse reached its peak, I felt it, something tugged at my mind, something deep and wrong. It was as though time itself had stopped, but not in the way you might imagine. It wasn't peaceful, it was suffocating, like a weight pressing down on my chest. The strange thing was, it didn't last long. In just a few moments, the sun returned to its normal shape, the shadows shrinking, the temperature rising again. People began talking, laughing uneasily, as if they had just woken from a shared nightmare. But as I looked around, I noticed something odd. The town hadn't quite returned to normal. The houses were too still. The streets were eerily empty. The usual sounds, the hum of the wind, the distant barking of dogs, the engines of trucks, were absent. Something was wrong, and it wasn't just in my head. I turned to leave, to find someone who could explain this strange unease, but as I took my first step, I froze. I had taken that step before. Confusion washed over me. I looked back at my feet. No, I couldn't have. I was sure I hadn't moved yet. But somehow, the ground beneath me felt exactly the same, as if the path ahead had already been walked. I glanced around again. The town was unchanged. Same empty streets, same stillness. And then I saw it. A figure standing in the distance, just at the end of the street, staring at me. I couldn't make out any details, but the shape was unmistakable. It was like someone was waiting for me. I took another step forward, and again, the world seemed to shift. I blinked, and the figure was gone. I was back at the same place I had started. The same empty street. The same heavy silence. I turned in a circle, but nothing had changed. Everything looked the same, and yet, it didn't. My heart began to race. Was this some kind of joke? A trick of my mind? But no, this was real. I knew it was real. The silence deepened around me. And then the ground shifted under my feet once more. And this time, I heard it. A faint sound, just barely audible at first. A soft shuffling noise, like the rustling of leaves, but it wasn't coming from the trees. It was coming from the shadows, just beyond my vision. I took another step. The sound grew louder. Another step. Louder still. I turned around, panic rising in my chest. Nothing was there, but the sound of shuffling continued, drawing nearer. And then, with a sickening realization, I understood. It was me. I was walking in circles, over and over again. The town, the streets, the air, everything was the same. The eclipse had done something. Something had broken time, trapping me in this never-ending loop. I felt my pulse quicken. How could this be happening? Why was it happening? And then, Just as quickly as the panic had risen, I forced myself to calm down. I had to think. There had to be a way out of this, a reason, a solution. But as the minutes stretched on, and I tried again to break free from this endless loop, it became clear. There was no escape. The town, it was stuck. And so was I. I couldn't remember how many times I had walked those same streets. It had to be at least 10 or 20. Each time, I found myself back in the same spot, the same crossroads, the same empty street. The sun hadn't moved, but it didn't feel like midday anymore. The sky was dim, as if it couldn't decide whether it was twilight or dawn. I started questioning everything. Was this real? Was I dreaming? But every time I pinched myself, every time I shook my head to break free of whatever fog had settled over my mind, nothing changed. The air was thick, the same stillness pressing in from every corner of the town. The roads remained untouched, the houses unchanged. I looked at the street signs, wondering if they had shifted, if they had moved out of place in some subtle way. But no, they stood straight and unchanged. The faintest breeze still didn't stir the trees. It was as if time had frozen, or worse, had it somehow folded on itself. I tried to tell myself this was just a trick. Maybe I had blacked out for a moment, and now I was simply confused. Maybe it wasn't real. But then, I heard it again. The sound. The shuffle. I froze, my heart pounding as I turned toward it. I couldn't see anything, but the noise was closer now. Closer than it had been before. It wasn't just the sound of something moving, it was the sound of something watching, something waiting. My legs tensed, ready to run, but I stayed rooted to the spot, trying to listen more carefully. It was coming from behind one of the houses, a rustling sound. Something shifting in the dark spaces, like there were more feet than one set. I took a step forward, every nerve in my body screaming to turn and leave, but I couldn't. I had to know what was happening. As I rounded the corner of the house, the sound stopped. Dead silence. But then, I saw it. A figure. It was a shadow at first. No, not a shadow. Something darker, moving against the stillness. I blinked, but when I looked again, it was gone. The hairs on my neck stood up. I could feel the presence, like it was waiting for me. Watching me. I hadn't imagined it. I knew what I saw. I just wasn't sure what it was. I spun around, suddenly aware of how quiet everything was. Not even the usual hum of the town felt right. I was alone, completely alone in a place that should have been familiar. A place I had lived for years. But now, it felt like I was in the wrong version of it, like I had stepped into some distorted reflection. I took a deep breath and forced myself to move forward, trying to push the panic down. I walked past the bakery on the corner, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw someone inside. A shadow moving behind the windows, but when I reached the door, the bell rang, and the shop was empty. I blinked, staring at the door. Had I seen that wrong? Suddenly, the air grew colder. Not like the gentle dip of a winter night, but something sharp. Something unnatural. The ground beneath my feet felt heavier, like I was trudging through mud instead of solid earth. I tried to steady myself. Don't panic. Focus. Just get home and figure this out. But as I made my way back down the street, the buildings seemed to loom over me in ways they hadn't before. The familiar houses, the quiet roads, they all seemed darker, more oppressive, like they were closing in on me. The shuffle came again. Closer. It was louder now, unmistakable. Someone, or something, was following me. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't the sound of footsteps. It was something worse, like claws scraping against the ground, something skittering across the dirt, coming toward me from behind. I turned quickly, my heart racing. Nothing. No one. The street was still empty, like it had always been. The shadows stretched across the pavement, dark and long, but nothing was moving. I was starting to feel dizzy. Maybe I was losing it. Maybe I had been stuck in this loop for so long that I was losing my grip on reality. Was this some kind of mental breakdown? Was I trapped in a dream? But no. Something was wrong here. I could feel it in my bones. I was trapped in something, and it wasn't a dream. The worst part wasn't the darkness or the unsettling quiet, it was the way the world seemed to respond to me. The way it bent around me, following my movements like it was alive. It was as if the very town was aware of me, aware of my every step. It was suffocating. I didn't know how long I had been walking, or if I had even walked anywhere at all. The day, no, the time, hadn't changed. Everything was still the same. But then, for the first time since the eclipse, I heard something that chilled me to the core. A voice. A whisper. It was faint at first, barely audible. But as I stopped, it grew clearer. Get out. The voice wasn't familiar, but it was unmistakable. It wasn't a person, it was something else, something twisted. The whisper wrapped around me, crawling under my skin, sending a wave of panic through my veins. I took a step back. Who's there? I called, my voice trembling. Nothing. Then, as if in answer, I heard it again. Get out, before it's too late. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. The shadows shifted, and I felt something move behind me. And for the first time, I understood the terrible truth. Whatever was here, whatever had happened to this town, it was waiting for me to leave. But there was nowhere to go. The town was endless. The loop, eternal. I was already too late. The air grew heavier, pressing in from all sides. The voice had faded, but its warning lingered, echoing in my mind like a distant drumbeat. I wanted to run, to break free from whatever this was, but I couldn't. My legs felt heavy, as if they were made of stone, dragging me through the dirt that now clung to my shoes. I looked around again, trying to make sense of what was happening. The houses, familiar, yet foreign, stood silent, their windows dark and uninviting. I could still feel their eyes on me, even though they were just empty structures. The eerie quiet was suffocating, broken only by the shuffle, always just behind me. My breathing was shallow, the panic clawing at my throat, making it harder to think. I told myself it wasn't real, that it couldn't be. But the more I told myself that, the more the world around me twisted in ways I couldn't ignore. I needed to find someone. Anyone. I needed to prove I wasn't alone, that I wasn't trapped in some never-ending nightmare. But every turn I took, every street I tried to leave, always led me back to the same place. The same crossroads. The same dim sky. I stood at the corner of Maple and Fifth, staring down the street, watching the shadows stretch long and twisted in the soft light. The buildings were silent. Still. But then, just at the edge of my vision, I saw it. The faintest movement. Something, or someone, moved behind one of the houses, its shape more like a dark blur than a solid figure. I knew it wasn't my imagination. The shuffle had stopped, But this felt different. A presence, creeping closer, hovering just out of sight. I took a step forward, my body betraying me as my curiosity overpowered my fear. My eyes never left the spot where I had seen the movement, my heart thumping louder in my chest with every second. The sound came again, only now it wasn't just a shuffle. It was something else, something that scraped against the earth, something that didn't belong. The shadows at the edge of the house shifted again. This time, I could see them more clearly. Not human, not even animal. Long, wiry limbs, too many for one body, scraping across the ground like claws. The silhouette wasn't quite right, too large, too monstrous for anything natural. I felt the urge to scream, to run, but I couldn't. My legs wouldn't move. My body was frozen in place, and in the quiet of the town, it felt like the whole world was holding its breath. It was closer now. The scraping sound was almost deafening, as though the ground itself was being clawed apart. I could see it, them, now. Dark shapes, no more than shadows themselves, but there were many. Their eyes glowed in the dark, like faint embers, watching me. Judging me. There was no time. I had to run. I turned, stumbling in the direction of the closest alley. My feet were uncoordinated, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My mind was screaming at me to go faster, but my legs refused to obey. They felt like lead. I reached the alley, looking around desperately for an escape. The buildings loomed tall on either side, their windows dark and empty. The alley stretched forward, but I couldn't see where it led. I didn't care. All I knew was I had to get away from those eyes. The sound came again, the scrape of claws, the shuffle of many feet. It was closer, right behind me now. I could feel the presence, just inches away, closing in. The dark shapes were following me, moving faster now. They weren't just following, they were hunting. I turned a corner, my feet slipping on the damp ground, and for a moment, I thought I was free. But then, the air grew colder, unnaturally so. A gust of wind swept through the alley, carrying with it the unmistakable smell of decay. The smell of rot. I gagged, clutching my throat, trying not to breathe it in, but it was too thick. Too suffocating. And then, I heard the whisper again. Get out. It was softer this time, a hiss in the air that wrapped around my skin like ice. I spun around, searching for the source, but the alley was empty. The shadows had swallowed everything whole. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That something, where someone, was watching me, waiting for me to make my next move. I have to get out. But where was out? Everywhere I went, everything I tried, led me back here. Back to the same place, over and over again. The shadows were closing in, filling the alley like a rising tide. The dark shapes were getting closer, their glowing eyes fixed on me. There were so many of them now, I couldn't count. They were everywhere, their movements swift, fluid, like something alive. I backed up, my heart racing, the air growing heavier with each breath. I could feel the cold creeping into my bones, the walls of the alley pressing in. I couldn't escape. There was nowhere to run. The voices grew louder. A chorus of whispers, hissing in the dark, echoing from all directions. You shouldn't have stayed. My mind reeled, and for a moment, I thought I saw something that made my stomach churn. A face, half human, half something else, emerged from the shadows. Its eyes were wide and glassy, empty, but there was a flicker of something more, something ancient and wrong, lurking deep inside. It opened its mouth, and the words came out, not in a voice, but in a feeling. A threat. You'll never leave. And that's when I realized the truth. There was no escape. No way out of this place. It had already claimed me, just like it had claimed everyone else. The shadowy figures closed in around me, their eyes gleaming with hunger. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me whole was the face. The face that had once been human but had been twisted, reshaped by the town's curse. It was a face I knew. A face that belonged to someone I had seen before. I had seen this face before the loop began. And then everything went black. When I woke up, I was standing at the same corner, Maple and 5th, again. My heart skipped a beat, and for a split second, I thought I might still be in the dream, in the nightmare, but the sensation in my chest was unmistakable. I was alive. At least, I thought I was. The street stretched out before me, the same as always, the same silence hanging in the air. But the silence was different this time. It wasn't just quiet, it was oppressive. As if the world itself had stopped breathing. I looked around, my mind reeling from what had just happened, or what I thought had just happened. The figures, the glowing eyes, the whispers, the cold. I couldn't be sure anymore if it was real. But then I saw it. The shadows. They weren't just shadows anymore. They were shifting, moving, not like anything I'd ever seen. They no longer stayed at the edges of the houses or in the dark alleys. They were now seeping into the very walls of the buildings. Looming. The air grew thick, heavy with something that felt like dread. My throat tightened, and I swallowed, hard. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was something else, a pressure, something squeezing the air from my lungs. I needed to move. But my legs were slow, sluggish. My feet felt glued to the ground, as if I was meant to stay here forever, a part of this twisted town that no longer felt like home. I tried to look at the faces in the windows of the houses. But they were blank. Empty. No one was there. Not anymore. Were they ever here? I closed my eyes, my head spinning. I tried to breathe in deeply, but the air tasted foul, like rot. The same putrid smell from the alley earlier. No, this isn't happening. This can't be real. But when I opened my eyes, it was still the same corner. The same town. The same damned loop. Something was wrong. I was stuck. I looked down the street again. There was no escape. I turned back and started walking in the opposite direction, but no matter how far I went, I always ended up back here. The same spot. The same moment. It felt as though the ground beneath me was shifting, warping, bending. I stumbled, but caught myself just in time, my pulse quickening. There was no way out. The town had become a prison, a loop I couldn't break. I wasn't just stuck in time anymore. It felt as though I was trapped inside a nightmare, a place that bent and distorted reality. My eyes darted around, and for the first time, I noticed that the buildings weren't just empty, they were watching me. The very air felt thick, as if the town itself was alive and aware of my every movement. The houses on Maple Street, had they always looked this way? I wasn't sure anymore. There was something wrong with them, something unnatural about the angles of the roofs, the way the walls seemed to breathe with the wind. It wasn't right. None of it was. The shuffle began again. It was faint at first, just a whisper of sound that could have been the wind. But I knew better now. I knew it wasn't the wind. It was something else, something following me. something just behind me. I whipped around, my heart hammering in my chest. The street was empty. No one. No shadow. Just the dull quiet of the town. Don't turn back. But I couldn't stop myself. I looked. I had to look. The sound came again, this time closer, clearer. A scrape against the earth. Closer. Then, as I slowly turned my head, I saw it. A shadow, no, a figure, standing just at the edge of the street. Too tall. Too wide. A dark silhouette that loomed over me like a threat I couldn't escape. I froze. It had no face. No eyes. But I felt its gaze. It saw me. My body betrayed me again, and I couldn't move. The shadow stepped forward, its form stretching and distorting with each movement. And with each step it took, the temperature dropped, the air growing thick and suffocating. You shouldn't have stayed. The voice. Soft. Cold. Familiar. I couldn't place it at first, but then I realized. It was my voice. My own voice, but not mine. It came from somewhere else. From deep inside the shadows. It was me, but it wasn't. The voice of someone who had already given up, who had already become a part of this place. The figure moved again, closer this time, its presence suffocating. I could feel its weight in the air, pressing down on my chest. I backed away, my legs trembling beneath me, my thoughts scattered, panic taking hold of my mind. I turned, desperate to run, but my feet wouldn't move. It was then that I saw them, the glowing eyes. Hundreds of them. From all directions. They were everywhere now. Watching. Waiting. Lurking just outside the reach of my vision, and yet I could sense them. Every flicker. Every shift. I was surrounded. They're here. I tried to scream, but my voice was lost in the heavy air, swallowed up by the shadows. The whispers grew louder, louder than my own heartbeat. They filled my mind, curling around my thoughts like smoke. I couldn't breathe. The shadows were closing in. I was suffocating. And that's when I knew. This wasn't just a dream. This wasn't some loop of time. This was something far worse. I had crossed the line. I had stayed too long. I had become a part of it. The whispers stopped. The eyes closed in. And everything went dark again. I woke up again, but this time it was different. The town was silent. Too silent. I had hoped that when I opened my eyes, it would be over. That I would wake up somewhere normal, that everything would snap back into place. But no! There was only the same oppressive quiet. And the same dread. I stood in the middle of the street, the sky above still an unnatural shade of yellowish-brown. The sun had long since disappeared, swallowed whole by the constant, unrelenting shadow. No birds chirped. No cars drove by. Just the hum of the air, thick and suffocating, like it was trying to press everything down into the earth. I rubbed my face, trying to shake the disorienting sensation that still clung to me. The shadows. The eyes. The whispers. They felt so real, so close, that it was as if they were waiting for me to finally snap, to break under the pressure. I took a step forward, the ground beneath my feet colder than before, the pavement cracked and broken, as if the very town itself was decaying. I had to find a way out. I had to escape. I turned left, walking down Maple Street, hoping that by some miracle I could outrun the feeling that had been suffocating me for what felt like an eternity. But there was no escape. I knew that now. No matter how far I went, the town would always be there. It would always pull me back, drag me into its grasp. The figures appeared again. The same shadows, standing just beyond the range of my vision. I could feel them before I saw them, the weight of their presence like a pressure on my chest. I stopped. One by one, the shadows began to move, their shapes warping, stretching like dark smoke. They slithered toward me, their glowing eyes piercing the ever-present darkness. There were more of them now, too many to count, and they were all coming for me. A shiver ran down my spine as I backed away. I wanted to scream, but my throat was dry, constricted, the air too thick to breathe properly. No. This can't be real. This has to end. But the figures didn't stop. They came closer, their steps deliberate, their eyes locking onto mine. There was no escape. No place to hide. No one to help me. The sound of scratching claws echoed in the distance, growing louder, nearer. It was the same sound I had heard earlier, the sound that sent a chill through my bones. I whipped around, searching for the source, but there was nothing. Just the empty street and the creeping shadows. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. The alleyway. The same alley I had avoided before, the one that had felt like a doorway to something darker. It was too familiar now, a symbol of my inevitable fate. But this time, I couldn't ignore it. I stepped forward, heart pounding in my chest, my body moving without my mind's command. The alley was darker than before, the air even colder. The walls seemed to lean in, suffocating me, the shadows pressing against me like they were alive. I kept moving. One foot in front of the other, my breath ragged, the fear eating at me from the inside out. The alley stretched on forever. It felt like it was going nowhere, but still, I walked. Every step seemed to take me deeper into the darkness, farther away from everything I knew. I'm trapped. I stopped. The sounds of footsteps behind me grew louder, closer. I wasn't alone. Turning around, I saw them, dozens of glowing eyes, hundreds of figures, all standing at the edge of the alley. I could feel their presence before I even saw them. They were waiting, like they had been all this time, waiting for me to make a mistake, waiting for me to slip. One of them stepped forward. It was massive, taller than any of the others, its eyes glowing with an unnatural intensity. It didn't move like the others. It slithered through the darkness, its form undulating as it came closer. And I realized, with a sickening certainty, that this was it. This was the end. The figure loomed over me, its face still a dark void, but its eyes, those piercing, glowing eyes, burned through me like fire. It opened its mouth, and I could hear it speak, though its voice wasn't a voice at all. It was something deeper, something ancient. You are ours. The words echoed in my mind, vibrating through my skull, shaking my very core. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure's presence was suffocating. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. The shadows closed in. The walls seemed to bend, pressing against me, swallowing me whole. I was no longer in the alley. I was somewhere else, somewhere worse. I felt the pressure of 1,000 eyes upon me, watching me, waiting. Then, all at once, I understood. The town. The loop. The shadows. They weren't just a place. They were a thing. A living, breathing thing. A force that existed to pull people in, to consume them, to trap them in its endless cycle. And I had become part of it. Forever. The shadows twisted and stretched, the world around me warping as the darkness claimed me completely. I never woke up. Thank you for making our stories part of your relaxation time. We hope they brought you a sense of peace and transported you to a world of fantasy and mystery. If you enjoyed the stories, feel free to leave us a review. Your feedback inspires us and helps us make the content even better. Now, unwind to the calming sounds of rain and thunderstorms, which will continue to set a tranquil mood. Let these sounds carry you gently into the realm of dreams. Don't forget to like our page if you haven't yet. Wishing you a restful night's sleep. Relax, rest well, and good night.